Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Ronald Platt. July 28, 1996, began as a typical summer day in South England. Captain John Kopeck and his son prepared for a fishing trip on their trawler, the Melcari. Despite an unsuccessful day, they decided to try their luck in a spot known as the Roughs. They lowered the net into the water and waited. The two men felt a tug on the net, indicating that it was a large catch. However, when they pulled the net up, they were shocked to find that it was not a fish, but instead a badly decomposed body of a man. Captain Kopeck immediately contacted the Brixham Coast Guard to report the discovery. The body was in a state of severe decomposition, indicating that it had been in the ocean for some time. Fish had nibbled at parts of the body, but despite the decomposition, the man's clothing was intact: a long-sleeved shirt, corduroy pants, and brown shoes. And there was no identification on the body. The only identifying features found on the dead man were a smudged tattoo on his right hand and a Rolex watch on his wrist. The body was taken to the medical examiner's office in Devon for further examination. It was estimated that the man was between 40 and 50 years old. A distinctive tattoo of a cluster of stars was found on his body. His only severe injury was a head wound, which was not fatal. This, combined with other bruising, suggested that he had been dragged along the seabed before being pulled into a boat. However, his lungs were filled with water, indicating that he had ultimately drowned. Police suspected that the man might have fallen overboard during a ferry crossing. The primary method for identifying him was through dental records, as they would be on file if he was a British citizen. However, this process would take some time. It was by chance that a mortuary technician noticed the man's watch, a Rolex Oyster self-winding model that was fully waterproof. The watch required regular motion to stay active and, as an original model, its ownership could potentially be traced. Police examined the watch found on the unidentified man and discovered a crucial clue. The calendar feature showed the date July 22nd, indicating that the man had likely drowned 2 days earlier, on July 20th, 1996. Further examination revealed a serial number hidden between the wristband and the watch face. Police sent this number to Rolex to verify its authenticity and determine who owned the watch. The mystery surrounding the man, now known as Rolex Man, gained further clues a few weeks later, after a records search identified the watch's owner as Ronald Joseph Platt. Ronald Joseph Platt was a 51-year-old TV repairman born in Calgary, Canada. His family later moved to Britain, where he grew up. Ronald remained unmarried and had served in the British Army as part of his national service. Those who knew him well described Ronald as a quiet and introverted man with a deep love for his native Canada. Ronald bought a Rolex watch in Germany in 1967, which became one of his most prized possessions. Ronald was so attached to the watch that, according to his former partners, he even wore it in the shower. Detective Constable Clenahan from the Devon and Cornwall Police was assigned to the case from the start. The police investigation revealed that Ronald's last known address was in Essex, which was hundreds of miles away from where his body was found. Clenahan contacted the Essex Police Department for assistance. Inspector Peter Redmond offered to visit the address to help with the investigation. When he visited the house, Peter found it vacant. Peter then contacted the owner and was told that the owner had moved out some time ago. However, Peter was provided with a letter of introduction that could assist in the investigation. The letter provided the address and contact details of a man named David Davis. Detective Peter called the number and got in touch with Davis. Before delivering the news, Peter asked Davis about his relationship with Ronald. Peter then informed Davis that a body had been found in Devon that was likely to be his friend. Davis agreed to meet with the police in Essex to discuss the matter further. When they met, Peter found Davis to be friendly and confident, but surprisingly calm and asked very few questions about Ronald's death. Davis and Ronald had been friends for several years. Davis hadn't seen Ronald in over 3 months, and the last time they met, Davis had given him a loan to start an electrical business in France. Since then, Davis had assumed Ronald was living in France. During their conversation, Peter discovered that the symbol tattooed on Ronald's hand was a maple leaf, the national symbol of Canada. After providing all the necessary information, Davis left the station, assuring Detective Peter that he would send a photo of Ronald. The Essex police were then able to conclude their investigation, forming the theory that Ronald had fallen overboard and drowned in the channel. This theory aligned with Davis's account of the events, suggesting it was simply an unfortunate accident. With the Essex case over, Clenaghan had a problem on his end. He tried to contact Davis several times but was unsuccessful. Clenaghan then asked his colleague, Detective Peter of Essex, to help him contact Davis. Peter agreed and visited Davis at his home in Wooden Walter, a rural area of Essex with only 4 houses. They continued to describe Ronald to Peter, and he suddenly realized that the man they were describing was none other than the recently deceased Ronald Platt. This sudden revelation aroused Peter's suspicions, and he quickly contacted Clenaghan in Devon to share this surprising discovery. Police from both counties began to suspect that there was more to the case than initially appeared. Peter turned his attention to gathering information about the man impersonating his deceased friend. Peter visited an elderly couple, Frank and Aubrey, who shared with him the story of Ronald Platt, a young man with a wife and 2 young children. The couple mentioned that Ronald and his family frequently vacationed in Devon, where they owned a yacht, although they could not remember the name of the yacht. In Devon, Clenaghan reviewed the evidence and began reinterrogating old witnesses. His first was John Kopeck, who revealed that when Ronald's body was found, a 10-pound anchor had also been pulled up in the net. John Kopeck had given the anchor to a friend, who then passed it on to his mother to sell. Fortunately, the anchor had not yet been sold, allowing the police to retrieve it as evidence. Clenaghan's next step was to interview people who knew Ronald. He contacted Ronald's brother, Brian. Brian mentioned Elaine Boyes, Ronald's old friend of 13 years. Police then spoke with Elaine Boyes and discovered the connection between Ronald Platt and Davis. Elaine Boyes had met Davis in 1991 while working as a receptionist at a fine arts auction house in Harrogate, England. She recalled Davis as being tall, engaging, and charming. During their conversation, Davis mentioned his plans to move to Yorkshire, and the topic turned to job opportunities. Davis offered Elaine Boyes a job at his company, but she declined, explaining that she and Ronald were planning to move to Canada soon. Davis offered to help Elaine Boyes and Ronald save money to move to Canada. Elaine Boyes soon became Davis's executive assistant, and she soon introduced Ronald to Davis. The 2 men quickly became close friends. Elaine Boyes and Ronald were fascinated by Davis's lavish stories and impressed by his lavish lifestyle. Davis then offered them a business opportunity, proposing that they become directors of his company, the Cavendish Corporation. Although Elaine Boyes was initially hesitant, Davis explained that he wanted to keep a low profile due to his ex-wife, a wealthy doctor in New York, who allegedly still demanded alimony payments from him. By this point, Elaine Boyes and Ronald had developed a trust in Davis and believed that he was genuinely trying to protect her from his ex-wife. Davis sent both Elaine Boyes and Platt on business trips to Europe to negotiate deals on his behalf, gradually drawing them into his scheme. They transferred money to various offshore bank accounts without asking Davis what he intended to do with it, trusting him greatly because of his religious nature. On Christmas Day 1992, Davis invited Elaine Boyes and Ronald to visit Davis and his daughter, Noelle. After a sumptuous meal, they exchanged gifts. Elaine Boyes presented Davis with a card titled "The Greatest Gift Ever." In return, Davis gave the couple 2 plane tickets to Canada, provided they used them before February 1993. While Elaine Boyes was overwhelmed by the short notice, Ronald was overjoyed that his lifelong dream of returning to Canada had finally come true thanks to Davis. In preparation for their upcoming trip, Davis quickly made arrangements. To ensure he could effectively manage their affairs while they were away, he asked Elaine Boyes and Ronald to stamp their signatures and leave their driver's licenses with him in case they needed to prove their identity. Elaine Boyes and Ronald agreed, as they trusted Davis and were grateful for the new beginning he provided. Consequently, in February 1993, they left for Canada. However, the harsh winter conditions, lack of job opportunities, and resulting financial strain quickly put pressure on their relationship. Elaine Boyes and Ronald's relationship began to unravel due to increasing tension, ultimately causing them to drift apart. 5 months later, Elaine Boyes traveled to England to serve as a bridesmaid at her sister's wedding, with no intention of returning to Canada. Davis, who had become a family friend, was also invited to the wedding. During the event, he spoke with Elaine Boyes and asked about Ronald. Upon learning that Elaine Boyes had ended her relationship with Ronald and would not be returning to Canada, Davis was upset. He attempted to persuade Elaine Boyes to give Ronald another chance, but she refused. Davis packed up his life, said goodbye to Elaine Boyes, and left her with his mobile number. However, their friendship eventually dissolved, and the phone calls ceased. Ronald and Elaine Boyes had lost contact. Ever since Elaine Boyes moved away from Canada, she had not heard from Ronald, her former lover, or Davis, who had been her best friend. So when Davis suddenly contacted Elaine Boyes in late 1996, their conversation was somewhat awkward. They barely exchanged any important information, and surprisingly, Davis did not even mention Ronald's name. The conversation was brief, and they did not keep in touch after that. He failed to tell her that Ronald was dead. After the interview, Elaine Boyes suspected Davis was involved in Ronald's death. Police needed more concrete evidence. They started questioning witnesses. Following the wedding in Harrogate, Davis quickly moved to Devon with his family. There, he introduced himself as Ronald Platt. He also introduced his pregnant daughter as his wife, sometimes calling her Elaine Boyes. It was well known that Davis owned a yacht. Witnesses reported seeing Ronald and Davis together a month before Ronald's body was discovered. They claimed to have registered on Steam Packet as brothers, David and Ronald Platt. By this point, police knew Davis had lied about Ronald and his knowledge of Ronald's death. They needed one last piece of evidence to confirm their suspicions. Police analyzed mobile records and discovered that the calls made by Davis originated from the same area where the medical examiner believed Ronald had drowned. This led Essex police to plan a sting operation to arrest Davis on suspicion of Ronald's murder. The police were informed by Elaine Boyes that Davis had arranged to meet her for coffee at Chelmsford train station. The police arrived at the train station. However, Davis had escaped. Not giving up, Detective Peter decided to drive to the Davis family home. Pete called for backup. He speculated that Davis might be armed. As the police prepared to act, a taxi stopped at the entrance of the house, and Davis quickly escaped. The police promptly gave chase, and Davis was eventually caught and forced to surrender at gunpoint after Davis was arrested. Police took his fingerprints and submitted them to an international database. Albert Johnson Walker, a man on Interpol's wanted list and Canada's most wanted fugitive, was identified as the owner of the discovered prints. Albert Johnson's life story began in Canada. Born on August 9, 1945, in Hamilton, Ontario, Albert Johnson had big ambitions despite dropping out of high school. He had a charismatic presence. Albert Johnson met his ex-wife, Barbara MacDonald. They married in 1968. The couple started a family early and had 7 children, 3 girls and 4 boys. Albert Johnson was born in Paris, Ontario, where he and his wife Barbara started a freelance accounting business. The business grew rapidly, and within a decade, it had expanded to 6 locations with more than 30 employees. However, Albert Johnson deceived his friends and clients by secretly transferring their investments to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Over time, Albert Johnson's dishonesty wasn't the only problem he faced. His marriage began to fall apart due to his many affairs. Furthermore, those he had stolen money from began to become suspicious. With his empire on the brink of collapse, Albert Johnson decided to go on the run in 1990. Under the pretext of taking his 15-year-old daughter Sheena on a skiing trip to Europe, Albert Johnson escaped. Barbara discovered the incident and, concerned for her daughter's safety, reported her missing. The police tracked Albert Johnson to London, but lost track of him. Albert Johnson assumed a new identity, stolen from a client. He now went by the name Davis Wallace, and his daughter Sheena changed her name to Noel. Although he evaded the police, the name Davis linked him back to his real identity. Davis Wallace needed a new identity, and his opportunity came when he met Ronald Platt. Ronald had a strong interest in Canada. Davis used this information to his advantage and created a new identity for himself. However, his plans began to fall apart in 1995 when Ronald contacted him, saying that Ronald was frustrated with life in Canada and was moving back to Essex to be closer to Davis. This development posed a problem for Davis, as having 2 Ronald Platts with the same birth date in the same area would have raised suspicion. To solve this problem, Davis came up with a plan. He bought a yacht, the Lady Jane, and took his family and Ronald to Totnes and Devon to celebrate the launch. During this trip, Davis and Ronald purchased a new 10-pound anchor. Davis invited Ronald to Devon for the weekend to go fishing and enjoy the coast. Davis took Ronald to his boat, the Lady Jane, far enough from shore to avoid detection. Once alone, Davis hit Ronald over the head with the anchor, knocking him unconscious. Davis then searched Ronald's pockets for identification and retrieved it. Davis tied the anchor to Ronald's waist to weigh him down and threw him into the water, intending to make it look like an accident. However, Davis made the mistake of leaving Ronald's Rolex watch on his wrist, which was later used to foil the carefully planned crime and bring Davis to justice. Davis's trial began in 1998. During the trial, some key evidence was presented to the court. The anchor found in the net along with Ronald Platt's body. Forensic experts analyzed the wound on Ronald's head and determined that it matched the shape of the anchor. Further investigation found traces of zinc on Ronald's belt, which matched the zinc found on the anchor. It was discovered that the anchor had been attached to Ronald's belt to drown him in the sea. A search of the yacht, Lady Jane, also uncovered significant evidence. Hairs matching Ronald's were found on a cushion, and his fingerprint was discovered on the bag that had been used to carry the anchor back to the yacht. Additionally, blood was found near the rails, providing further evidence to the case. Davis's hoarding habits cost him, as documents were seized and used to prove his sham business ventures and his trail of deception. Elaine Boy's testimony provided evidence that Davis would lose a lot if Ronald Platt returned to England. And his daughter Sheena testified that Davis had been out on a yacht and looked disheveled and agitated when he returned later that day of the murder. Sheena also spoke candidly about life with Davis and how she was constantly harassed by her father and feared for her own safety. Supreme Court Justice Neil Butterfield said Davis was an extremely intelligent and ruthless individual who posed a threat to others. He stated that Davis's crimes were carefully planned and executed with precision. As a result, Davis was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. In 2005, he was allowed to move to Canada to serve his sentence. 2 years later, at the age of 61, Davis was given an additional 4-year sentence to be served concurrently. In 2015, Davis applied for parole but withdrew it at the last minute. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ariel Castro. Ariel Castro was born in 1960 on July 10th in the city of Yauco in Puerto Rico. Ariel was the third child in a poor family of 4 children, including parents Liliana Rodriguez and Pedro Castro, and sisters O'Neill, Pedro, and older sister Bonita. Ariel's family barely made ends meet and his parents were constantly arguing. Before Ariel went to school, his parents divorced. His mother Liliana took care of all the children. Now Liliana had almost nothing left to feed her children. In desperation, Liliana and her children decided to move to the United States and settled for a while in southeastern Pennsylvania in the city of Reading. However, they soon moved to the neighboring state of Ohio and eventually settled in the city of Cleveland. Soon after, Ariel's father Pedro Castro also moved to Cleveland with his new wife and their children. Pedro Castro lived near Liliana and her children. Liliana later married, and Ariel soon had 4 more siblings. Ariel attended Lincoln West High School in Cleveland, graduating in 1978. In addition, Ariel also studied music and attended church regularly with her mother and siblings in a traditional Catholic family. As a teenager, Ariel met a young girl named Grimilda Figueroa, who lived next door to Castro. The two became friends while attending school, and Ariel and Grimilda later began dating. After saving money, Ariel and Grimilda decided to move to a house on Seymour Avenue in southwest Cleveland. The 2-story, 1,300 square foot house was built in 1890 and has been remodeled several times. Inside, there are 4 bedrooms, a dining room, a bathroom, and a spacious basement. However, since moving into the new house, Ariel regularly beats Grimilda and humiliates her morally and physically. Grimilda is still naive at this time and thinks that the situation will improve after the wedding and the birth of the child. However, as time goes by, the situation only gets worse. Grimilda tries not to let anyone know about the terrible things that are happening in her life. Grimilda hides her injuries under her clothes and makes up excuses for the injuries that cannot be hidden. In 1993, Ariel beat his wife so brutally that Grimilda suffered broken ribs, nose, and both arms from falling down the stairs after being pushed by Ariel. However, Grimilda steadfastly refused to report the incident to the police. The incident was covered up. Ariel repeatedly beat Grimilda in the mid-1990s. On one occasion, Ariel caused Grimilda a serious head injury that resulted in a blood clot and a tumor that could not be surgically removed. Ariel was arrested but released just a day later. By the late 90s, Grimilda was tired of the constant beatings and living in fear. Grimilda finally decided to file for divorce, took away the appliances, and moved out of the house. Grimilda won custody of all 4 of their children, Arlene, Antonio, Angie, and Amelia. However, Grimilda's nightmare did not end there. Ariel began to pursue Grimilda for money and threatened her to return to him. Realizing that Grimilda could not handle it on her own, Grimilda finally decided to report to the police to get a restraining order against Ariel. In late April 2012, Grimilda suffered complications related to an inoperable tumor caused by a head injury. Grimilda's children were old enough to care for themselves and live their own lives, so they did not need a guardian. However, the children still maintained contact with their father Ariel. Back in the early 2000s, Ariel lived alone in a 2-story house on Seymour Avenue. Ariel worked as a school bus driver and had a passion for playing the guitar. Ariel often performed at city festivals in Latin bands. His neighbors often spoke highly of him, praising his hospitality and kind personality. However, there were many strange things in Ariel's actions that went unnoticed. That he was prosecuted several times for traffic violations while driving a school bus. He had speeding and dangerously making U-turns, for which he was fined and even suspended for a while until he was fired in early 2013 for an act that threatened the lives and health of his young passengers. Additionally, Ariel frequently changed bands because Ariel was kicked out for being late, disrupting rehearsals and concerts. Another strange thing is that after his divorce from Grimilda, he never invited anyone to his house, although Ariel often invited neighbors to barbecues in his backyard. It's hard to say how dangerous this smiling, kindly-faced Ariel was. Michelle Knight was Ariel Castro's first victim. In 2002, on August 23, Ariel decided to kidnap Michelle Knight, then 21 years old. Michelle Knight was born in 1981 and came to Cleveland. Michelle was a frequent runaway and had a history with the police. After becoming a single mother, Michelle faced the risk of losing custody of her 2-year-old child. On the day of the incident, Michelle visited a relative's house and then had to go to court, where the issue of regaining custody of her 2-year-old child had just been decided. While walking down the street, Michelle saw Ariel Castro driving up and offering her a ride. Since Michelle knew the nearby school bus driver, she didn't suspect Ariel and decided to get in his car. On the way, Ariel tells Michelle that he is taking care of puppies at home and invites Michelle to visit them and help Ariel find homes for the puppies. Michelle agrees, but as soon as she enters Ariel's house, he changes completely. Ariel becomes violent and begins hitting Michelle repeatedly. Ariel then chains her up and takes her to the basement. Over the next few days, Ariel starved Michelle and denied her water. Michelle endured constant beatings and abuse. She could not even get up and had to beg Ariel to let her go, promising not to tell anyone about it. When Michelle's mother reported her daughter missing to the police, for years the police did not prioritize the case and allocated limited resources to the investigation. Michelle's family searched for the girl themselves by contacting neighbors, friends, and concerned people. They also asked for help from Ariel, who helped post flyers around the city with Michelle's picture. However, no one knew that Michelle was being held in Ariel's basement. Ariel's second character was Amanda Berry. This girl was kidnapped in the spring of 2003. Amanda was a young girl who lived near Ariel and worked at a local restaurant. She was born on April 22, 1986 and was about to celebrate her 17th birthday. However, on April 21, 2003, Amanda mysteriously disappeared. After her shift, Amanda called home and told her sister that she would be home soon. As Amanda left the restaurant and headed to the bus stop, Ariel drove up to her and offered to give Amanda a ride home. Amanda accepted. Amanda knew Ariel's son because they had been in the same class for many years. So Amanda trusted Ariel and agreed to go with him. However, Ariel lied to her along the way, saying that Ariel needed help. When Amanda entered Ariel's house, Amanda was trapped. Ariel raped her in public, then took Amanda to the basement. There, she met Michelle, who had been kidnapped and held captive for months. Amanda was also attacked, abused, and starved for days until Amanda's body was too weak to resist. A massive search was launched after Amanda went missing. Her disappearance was widely reported in the media and Amanda's parents appeared on popular television shows such as Oprah Winfrey and Montel Williams. They shared their story and urged anyone with information about Amanda's whereabouts to contact them immediately. On one show, famous psychic Sylvia Brown was invited on. After viewing a photo of Amanda, she said that the girl had died and her body was in the water. The words troubled Amanda's parents, but the mother, Louise Miller, continued to search for her daughter until she died in March 2006 of a heart attack. In 2012, a criminal named Robert Wolford suddenly confessed to Amanda's murder and offered to show them where her body was buried. Robert led police to a vacant lot in West Cleveland, claiming that he had buried Amanda there. However, a lengthy search failed to uncover any trace. Robert was later found to have lied for fame and television, leading to his being sentenced to an additional 5 years in prison for perjury and obstructing justice. In April 2004. This time, Ariel chose Gina De Jesus, a 14-year-old girl in his daughter's class. Ariel met Gina and another girlfriend after school. After chatting for a while, the two girls decided to go home separately. When they reached the corner of West 105th Street, Ariel met Gina and offered to take Gina home. Since Gina had known Ariel since childhood, having long been the father of her best friend, Gina got into Ariel's car without suspecting anything. Although it was daytime, there were no witnesses to the kidnapping because the streets were deserted at that time. In addition, Gina took the initiative to get into Ariel's car, so there was no easily detectable conflict. The story of Gina's disappearance was aired on Fox TV's America's Most Wanted and was re-aired twice in 2005 and 2006. Ariel also posed as a volunteer looking for missing girls. When she brought Gina home, Ariel treated Gina similarly to Michelle and Amanda. Abused, sexually assaulted, and locked in the basement. It is believed that the kidnapping was carried out by a middle-aged Hispanic man. Was seen by a passerby. There was even a sketch that looked very similar to Ariel. During the 10 years of their captivity, Ariel constantly abused her victims. They were often starved, attempting to break their spirits and destroy their self-esteem. Severe punishments were also carried out if the three girls did not comply. Michelle, the oldest captive, suffered the most. Ariel would not spare her and would often beat Michelle to intimidate the other girls, forcing them to obey without asking any questions. After years of captivity in the dark and damp basement, Ariel moved them to a room on the second floor, which overlooked the courtyard. During her captivity, Michelle became pregnant at least 5 times. However, each time she showed signs of pregnancy, Ariel brutally attempted to terminate the pregnancy, starving Michelle and kicking her in the stomach until Michelle miscarried. After one brutal torture, Michelle almost died from severe blood loss. Despite this, Ariel remained completely indifferent and refused to let her call a rescue vehicle. The girls were not allowed to bathe more than once a week. To use the toilet, they had only a bucket of water, which Ariel rarely emptied. Ariel only fed the girls once a day but constantly beat and abused them. One day, Ariel gives the girls a puppy, but a week later, Ariel brutally kills the dog in front of them as punishment for Michelle's disobedience. Gina, in 2006, Amanda realizes she is pregnant and is horrified by the image of Ariel beating her to induce a miscarriage. Ariel this time let Amanda get pregnant and give birth. In preparation for the birth, he bought a special inflatable float. In December 2006, Amanda gave birth to a daughter named Jocelyn. Although the baby was born weak, she was lucky to survive. As Jocelyn grew older, the girls began to care for her and create a close environment for her. This helped them temporarily forget the difficult situation they were in. Ariel also changed significantly after having his daughters. Ariel began giving the 3 girls he kidnapped small gifts and sometimes letting them out into the yard with Jocelyn, but always under close supervision. Jocelyn was developing well, speaking clearly, and being taught to read, write, and count by her mother. Outwardly, she appeared healthy, well cared for and well fed. Despite being imprisoned for years under Ariel's relentless control, the victims attempted to escape many times, but each time they were brutally punished, but the girls never gave up hope. However, on May 6, 2013, Ariel left the house and forgot to lock one of the interior doors. This gave Amanda an opportunity. She left the room and went to the window that looked out onto the street. When Amanda saw a neighbor walking past the house, Amanda began banging and screaming at the window. A man heard a strange noise and stopped, thinking someone needed help. Another neighbor also heard the screams and decided to call emergency services. While waiting for the police to arrive, the men broke the lock on the front door and helped Amanda and her young daughter escape. When the police arrived, Amanda told them that her name was Amanda Berry and that she had been kidnapped 10 years ago. Amanda also said that 2 other kidnapped girls were being held in a house, in other apartments. All 3 were rescued and taken to hospital the same day. Amanda, her younger daughter Jocelyn, and Gina were not in critical condition, but Michelle had suffered severe physical and mental damage from the constant abuse. Michelle lost hearing in one ear and almost lost sight in her left eye. Many of Michelle's bones were bent and would not heal, requiring plastic surgery to restore the shape of her disfigured face. After the trauma and forced abortion, Michelle was unable to have children. When police received a report of 3 missing girls and a baby found in Ariel's home, Ariel Castro was arrested in a McDonald's parking lot just an hour later. Ariel's brothers, O'Neill and Pedro, were also arrested on suspicion of involvement, as they had been frequent visitors to Ariel's home. However, they were quickly released due to lack of evidence linking them to the case, as the victims had confirmed. Ariel was charged with forcible kidnapping, assault, battery, forcible confinement, cruelty, and taking the life of an unborn child. Ariel could have received a common law conviction. However, the prosecution required a death sentence. Ariel agreed to cooperate with the investigation and pleaded guilty. Ariel would recount all the events that took place in his home. In return, he would not be sentenced to death, but instead to life in prison. Surprisingly, Ariel recalls in great detail the days of kidnapping the girls and bringing them into his home. Ariel recounted all the torture and abuse he had inflicted on his victims, but blamed the girls for unwittingly agreeing to get into Ariel's car and condemned himself to such a fate. On August 1, 2013, Ariel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On July 9, 2013, Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina De Jesus began a new life after being released from the Insanity's custody. After his conviction, Ariel was transferred to a rehabilitation center in Orient, Ohio, where he was closely monitored. However, on September 3, 2013, Ariel was found dead in his cell. At the time, Ariel was 53 years old. Ariel Castro's family members have apologized to the victims and their families. Michelle Knight wrote a book titled Life After Darkness: Finding Healing and Happiness After the Cleveland Kidnapping in 2018. Gina De Jesus also published a memoir titled Hope, a memoir of survival in Cleveland. There are also multiple documentary projects and 2 feature films about the terrifying kidnapping mission. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat, the case of Laura Wallen. Laura Wallen was born on February 10, 1986, to parents Mark and Gwen Wallen. She grew up in Olney, Maryland, alongside her older sister Jennifer, with whom she had a very close relationship. Laura's passion was in helping others, which led her to pursue a career as a social science teacher. The investigation into her disappearance began on September 5, 2017. It was led by Montgomery County Police Chief Tom Manger. He worked alongside Laura's family and friends, as well as her students. A group of more than 20 people, led by Saquon Maxwell, a former student of Laura's, came together to spread the word about Laura's disappearance by distributing flyers throughout the neighborhood and school district. Police officers searched Laura's neighborhood, asking residents questions and keeping a close eye on the area between Howard and Montgomery County. Laura's father, Mark, made a public plea for anyone with information to come forward and help find his daughter. He wanted Laura to know they were doing everything they could to find her and they weren't going to give up. Losing a child is one of the most difficult experiences a parent can face, and Mark wanted his daughter to know that they were working hard to bring her home safely. On the evening of September 7, 2017, an employee at the Jersey Gated Complex in Columbia, Maryland, found a new clue. While rummaging through a dumpster, he found Laura's license inside a cell phone. When police arrived, they also found Laura's vehicle parked at the complex. What puzzled them was that the complex was located just across the highway from Wild Lake High School, where Laura worked. This raised questions about why Laura would have parked her car there. Police took the evidence they collected to the lab for further testing. They also looked deeper into Laura's past and spoke to people close to her. To cover more ground, the investigation team divided into two groups. One group focused on tracking Laura's online activities, while the other group interviewed her family members and her boyfriend. To gather evidence, the police searched Laura's computer and cell phone. They also thoroughly searched her car for any clues that might point to her disappearance. In addition, they carefully reviewed her financial transactions and cell phone records. As part of their inquiry, the police also spoke with Laura's parents and sister about her disappearance. Laura's father, Mark, told them that the family had planned a weekend trip together, but Laura decided to stay behind to spend time with her boyfriend, Tyler. This was confirmed by her sister, Jennifer, who told police that Laura was expecting Tyler to propose to her during their time together. Police also obtained a text message conversation between Jennifer and Laura from the same weekend. Jennifer received messages from Laura stating that she and Tyler had plans for a countryside adventure on Saturday, September 2, 2017. Mark mentioned that Tyler had expressed his intention to marry Laura after learning of her pregnancy. However, on Monday morning, September 4, 2017, Laura sent Jennifer a concerning text message claiming the baby was not Tyler's, but rather her ex-boyfriend Antoine's. Jennifer found this suspicious, as Laura hadn't seen Antoine in over 2 years. She also noted that Laura had misspelled Antoine's name. When Jennifer tried to contact Laura, she received no response. Upon returning home on Monday evening, the family discovered that Laura was missing, leaving behind burning candles and her pet dog locked inside. The family suggested questioning Tyler, as he was the last person to see Laura. Tyler spoke with police and shared details of his weekend with Laura. He explained that he took her to Damascus, Maryland, to view a property he was interested in buying as a home for their future family. Laura seems excited about the idea of starting a family in the countryside. However, when they returned to Olney the following day, Sunday, September 3, 2017, the atmosphere had changed. According to Tyler, Laura was not as happy as she had been the day before. He revealed that they had an argument in Damascus, but he declined to elaborate on the disagreement. Tyler told police that when they returned to Laura's house, she asked him to return his set of keys. He agreed, not wanting to upset her further due to her pregnancy. They had planned to meet at the Columbia Mall on the morning of Monday, September 4, 2017, for breakfast and to discuss their issues, but Laura did not show up. When Tyler visited her house, there was no sign of her. Tyler initially told the police that he was unable to enter Laura's home because he didn't have a key. However, this statement was false. The neighbors reported seeing Tyler walking Laura's dog on Monday, September 4, at 2:30 p.m., which directly contradicted Tyler's claim. This raised a question for the police. If Tyler didn't have a key, how was he able to enter the home to take the dog for a walk? As police dug deeper, their suspicions about Tyler grew. They asked for and received permission to review his phone records. They also secretly placed a tracking device on his vehicle to monitor his movements. During this time, the police continued to search for Laura, fearing the worst but they hoping for the best and that she would return safely. The investigation uncovered some crucial information. A debit card transaction on September 2, 2017, revealed that Laura had made a purchase at a Safeway store. Surveillance footage confirmed that Tyler and Laura were together that evening. Analysis of their phone records showed that both their phones were in the same locations from that Saturday evening, but on Sunday, Laura's phone suddenly stopped moving. This finding, combined with the tracking device revealing Tyler's frequent visits to a field in Damascus, continues to imply Tyler is involved in Laura's disappearance. Tyler's phone records showed that he had texted a friend on Sunday evening, asking for a ride to help clean up a mess, but the friend declined. Further investigation revealed that both Tyler's and Laura's fingerprints were found on her vehicle, cell phone, and license, which were discovered in a dumpster in Colombia. This new evidence led police to bring Tyler in for additional questioning. Police asked Tyler about his involvement with Laura's cell phone and the presence of his fingerprints on her belongings. They also inquired about the cryptic message he had sent to his friend. In response, Tyler changed his story. He claimed that Laura was in trouble because she was pregnant by someone else, not him. He alleged that Laura had an affair with a student, which resulted in her pregnancy. Tyler's statement to the police was startling. He explained that he had taken Laura's car, license, and phone, and discarded them at the complex, an attempt to give her a head start to escape her problems before her family found out. His intention, he claimed, was to buy her some time to sort out her issues. He acknowledged trying to mislead everyone, including the police, in order to protect her because he cared about her. However, when police asked Tyler about Laura's current location, he denied knowing where she is now. But the police were not convinced by his story. Unbeknownst to Tyler, investigators had already discovered other messages on his phone, which painted a different picture of his relationship with Laura. A closer look at his phone revealed they discover that Tyler has been texting with other women. It turns out Laura isn't his only girlfriend. As the police dug deeper, they discovered that Tyler and Laura had a troubled 10-year relationship. This new information was sparked from Laura's father, Mark, who had always felt uneasy about Tyler. According to Mark, Tyler had never made an effort to be with Laura on important occasions, such as holidays and birthdays, which made him question Tyler's commitment to his daughter. What's more, Mark knew that Tyler was also dating another woman, Christina Wagner, who was a teacher like Laura. Further investigation led the police to friends of both Tyler and Christina. They revealed that Tyler had been leading a double life. It turned out that Tyler had met Christina in 2012 and had been living with her while still in a relationship with Laura. Friends of they told police that Christina and Tyler had gotten engaged and were planning to get married in 2018. When asked about Laura, Tyler's friends claimed that she had become aggressive and that Tyler was trying to distance himself from her. Police found text messages on Laura's phone that showed she had tried to contact Christina on August 28, 2017. In the messages, Laura expressed her desire to meet Christina to talk about Tyler. Friends claimed Christina was angry at Laura's bold actions and Christina confronted Tyler about it. Christina decided to file a police complaint. However, when police told Christina, Laura, and Tyler would have to go to court to get a restraining order, Tyler changed his mind and withdrew. Investigation revealed that Christina and Tyler had planned to spend the Labor Day weekend shopping for their wedding, but Tyler couldn't make it due to a knee injury. When police told Laura's family about Christina, they shared with officers what Laura had confided in them, that Tyler was being stalked by Christina. This new information made it more likely that Tyler could be a suspect in Laura's disappearance. Police brought Tyler in for questioning again, this time confronting him about Christina. Initially, he denied any involvement with her, but police were able to challenge his claim with evidence of his secret life. Eventually, Tyler admitted to cheating on both women, which had led to his fight with Laura. When investigators spoke with Tyler, he expressed his desire to mend his relationship with Laura. However, when asked about Laura's disappearance, he maintained that he was not involved. Unbeknownst to Tyler, the police discovered a connection between him and a vacant field in Damascus through his phone records. They found a link to a meat processing plant called KS Cuts, which was adjacent to the property that Tyler had visited with Laura. The plant's owner also owned the field they had visited. Interviews with the owner revealed that Tyler had previously worked for him and often helped him hunt on the property. Further questioning led to a disturbing discovery. Over the Labor Day weekend, Tyler had requested access to the safe on the owner's property, which contained 4.20 caliber rifles with ammunition. This new information led police to suspect that Laura may have been killed, but they could not confront Tyler yet. They still needed to find Laura and gather evidence to prove their suspicions correct. Laura's family, along with the police, devised a plan to try to get Tyler to reveal Laura's location. On September 11, 2017, Tyler joined Laura's parents, Mark and Gwen, at a press conference to appeal for Laura's safe return. However, this plan was set up as a trap. The police and Laura's family were hoping Tyler would make a mistake and reveal information about Laura's whereabouts. Meanwhile, police officers and cadaver dogs searched the fields near the meat processing plant in Damascus. During the press conference, Tyler made an emotional appeal for Laura's safe return. In his speech, he hinted that Laura shouldn't be ashamed of anything she'd done wrong. Tyler's speech included the following words: "Laura, if you're listening, it doesn't matter what happened. It doesn't matter what trouble you're in. We're going to fix it together, you, me, and your family. There are so many people who miss you, who are looking for you, and who are praying for your safety. We don't sleep or eat, we just pray that you're safe. I ask you to let us know that you're safe." Tyler claimed to be worried about Laura's disappearance, but what he didn't know was that he was the main suspect in the case. At the time, he seemed genuinely concerned, saying he was doing everything he could to find Laura and praying for her safe return. However, the situation took a devastating turn on September 13, 2017, just 2 days after the press conference. A secluded area of a field was identified as the location of Laura Wallen's body after K-9 dogs detected something suspicious. Upon further investigation, detectives discovered a freshly dug grave and recovered Laura's body at 5:30 p.m. The police were able to identify the body by matching the clothes Laura was wearing to a picture Jennifer had shown them from her last conversation with Laura. The discovery marked a tragic end to the desperate search for Laura. Laura Wallen, a highly respected teacher at Wild Lake High School and recent Teacher of the Year, tragically passed. The incident occurred around noon. Unfortunately, her unborn child also did not survive. The same day, Tyler Tessier, Laura's boyfriend, was arrested and charged with her murder. Tyler held at the county jail while investigators awaited the initial autopsy report. The report confirmed that Laura had been shot in the back of the head before being buried in the field. When Tyler was confronted with evidence, he created a false story. He claimed that on Sunday evening, he and Laura were at her house when a group of African American men burst in, took them hostage at gunpoint, and drove them to Damascus. According to Tyler, the men spared his life but shot Laura in the head, forcing him to bury her in a field. They threatened to harm him if he revealed their identities or led the police to Laura's body. However, police did not believe this story because they knew the relationship between Tyler and the property owner. Tyler then changed his story, claiming that he and Laura had an argument, which ended with him pushing her, causing her to fall, hit her head. He assumed she had died and buried her in the field to hide her body. Later, Tyler claimed that he had reconsidered and thought Laura might still be alive. To end her suffering, he dug up the grave, shot her in the head, and covered his tracks. He described this as a mercy killing. Tyler was held without bail at the Montgomery County Detention Center. Laura and her unborn son, baby Reed, were laid to rest in a public cemetery on September 30, 2017. Over 1,000 people, including Laura's family, friends, and students, attended the funeral to pay their respects to the beloved teacher. The prosecution, led by Montgomery County State Attorney John McCarthy, was building its case against Tyler. As they investigated, they developed a theory about Tyler's double life. They believed that Tyler was willing to continue living a secret life until Laura discovered his relationship with Christina. Fearing his deception would be exposed, Tyler began planning to kill Laura so he could continue his life with Christina. Tyler saw Labor Day weekend as the perfect opportunity to carry out his plan. With Christina out of town and Laura's family away, no one would be able to ask him about Laura's whereabouts until the weekend was over, giving him time to come up with an alibi. He chose a location he was familiar with, where he knew he could access the necessary equipment through a friend. The area was also isolated, making it unlikely that anyone would think to look for Laura there. Tyler fabricated a story about Laura's infidelity to throw her family and investigators off his trail. He deliberately left her car and belongings near her workplace, tried to create false evidence that she had run away because of a scandalous affair. However, Tyler made critical mistakes, constantly changing his alibi, which raised suspicions among the police from the start. Moreover, Tyler underestimated Laura's family, who had noticed that his relationship with Laura was unusual from the beginning. They felt that he never had the responsibility to her as a real-life partner. The prosecution had built a strong case against Tyler, presenting a convincing argument. However, Maryland law only allowed Tyler to be charged with Laura's murder. The death of her unborn child was not considered a separate crime under Maryland law, and this decision would be disputed during Tyler's trial in September 2018. On September 6, 2018, the pursuit of justice for Laura Wallen and her unborn son, baby Reed, came to an abrupt end. Tyler Tessier, the individual responsible for their deaths, was found hanging in his jail cell around 5 a.m. He had been allowed to shower and have breakfast before taking his own life. The news was a devastating blow to Laura's family, who had been seeking justice for their loved ones. They remembered Laura as a bright and loving person. According to reports, Tyler had written 5 letters indicating that he had planned to take his own life for some time. Laura's family did not get to see Tyler brought to justice. Laura's mother, when described Tyler as a diabolical human, and expressed relief that her family no longer had to worry about him being a part of their society. The case of Laura's murder is a tragedy that will leave many people questioning the nature of evil. It's heartbreaking that Laura and her unborn child were killed by the man she loved and trusted, who had promised her a happy future together. This case serves as a reminder that sometimes, the people we trust the most can be the ones who harm us the most. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Sierra Lamar. In March 2012, the Lamar family, consisting of Steve, a computer expert, his wife Marlene, and their 2 daughters, Danielle and Sierra, living in Fremont, California. Sierra was younger sister. She was born on October 19, 1996. Both girls had a relatively comfortable upbringing, with the usual ups and downs that come with family life. However, a disturbing fact about their father's past had a profound impact on the family. When Danielle and Sierra were younger, their father, Steve, was involved in a serious incident involving inappropriate behavior with one of their roommates during a sleepover. As a result, Steve was sentenced to 1 year in prison. Despite Steve's past convictions, both Sierra and Danielle reported having a good relationship with him, describing him as a kind and respected father. However, when Marlene learned about the incident, they decided to end their relationship, which was already struggling. Marlene soon moved on and started a new relationship. Despite this, both Sierra and Danielle attended Washington High School in their community, where they enjoyed socializing and performed reasonably well academically. Sierra was a cheerful and lively girl who was well-liked at school. She enjoyed participating in dance competitions and cheerleading. In October 2011, her mother, Marlene, decided to move from Fremont to Morgan Hill, a town located 40 miles southwest. Sierra, her mother, and her mother's boyfriend, Rick Gardner, settled into a rented ranch-style home on a rural cul-de-sac. However, Sierra was initially unhappy about leaving behind her close friends and hobbies in Fremont. She struggled to adjust to her new school, Sobrato High, where she didn't receive the same warm welcome she had at Washington High. Despite this, Sierra eventually settled in and made new friends, earning the respect and even joining the cheerleading squad again. By March 2012, Sierra had adapted well to her new environment. On March 11th, she had a conversation with her father and her sister, who still lived in Fremont, and updated them on her progress. The conversation was mostly positive, with Sierra expressing excitement about an upcoming school project, wanting to get her hair colored, and discussing her homework with her sister. Her academic performance seemed to be going well. Sierra ended her Thursday evening chat with Danielle and Steve after dinner, as she had school the next day and it was getting late. They agreed to part ways and promised to catch up soon, unaware that this would be their last conversation. The next morning, February 16, 2012, Sierra got ready for school, locking the house behind her. At 6:29 a.m., she tweeted a friend, then put on her shoes and left to catch the bus. The bus stop was located on a desolate road between Palm and Dewey Avenues, far from Sierra's school, Sobrato High. Many students, including Sierra, had to cross this road daily to catch the bus. At 7:11 a.m., Sierra texted a friend to meet up before class. However, when the bus arrived at 7:11 and 15 seconds a.m., Sierra was missing. Sierra didn't show up to school, which her friends found unusual. However, they didn't think it was serious enough to report to the school authorities. The day went on as usual. When the school day ended, Marlene, Sierra's mom, tried to contact Sierra, but her call went straight to voicemail. Although Marlene thought this was strange, she didn't get worried. However, when she got home and saw that Sierra's room was still empty, she realized that something was amiss. She contacted Steve to ask if Sierra was planning to visit him in Fremont again. Unfortunately, the answer was no. When Marlene called Danielle and a few other friends, they all left with the same message that Sierra could not be found. Marlene began to panic when she called Sierra's high school and discovered that she had missed all her classes. After her calling the authorities, officers were immediately sent to the pedo-Hispanic court. They began by speaking with those closest to Sierra, including several of her friends, who were all candid about the difficulties Sierra and her family were facing. Although Sierra was generally content, it had only been a few months since her mother's divorce forced her to leave her family and old friends behind. Authorities initially thought that Sierra might have left voluntarily, as she had previously mentioned returning to Fremont in a light-hearted and sometimes serious manner. However, there were several things that contradicted this theory. Sierra had stopped posting on social media, her phone was turned off, and all calls went straight to voicemail. She also never arrived at the front door of her home. Her loved ones launched a massive search despite police downplaying her disappearance. The investigation into Sierra's disappearance led to a complex trail of evidence. 2 days after she vanished, data forensics began examining her phone's previous activity. They discovered that her phone had briefly turned on in the middle of the night, before turning off again. The phone's coordinates pointed to a field near Sierra's house, which became a crucial lead in the investigation. A search crew thoroughly searched the fields where Sierra's phone had last been detected. Within minutes, they found the Samsung Galaxy phone she had been using. It was near the road, damaged, and had likely been thrown from a vehicle. Investigators concluded that Sierra hadn't turned on her phone that evening. Instead, they believed that rain had caused a false signal, briefly activating her phone. This coincidence was crucial, as the entire investigation hinged on the discovery of her phone. The case took a disturbing turn when detectives realized that Sierra's phone was probably thrown from a moving vehicle. There were no footprints, tire tracks, or other visible evidence. The next day, a search crew made another discovery. Sierra's backpack was found 2 kilometers from her house, discarded outside a barn. The bag contained her schoolwork, inhaler, and money, suggesting that she had been on her way to school and was forcibly separated from her essential items. Additionally, a complete outfit, believed to be the one Sierra was wearing the morning she vanished, was found in her luggage. This outfit included her pullover, pants, socks, shoes, and even undergarments. The outfit was subjected to DNA testing, which yielded results. Specifically, her pants contained male foreign DNA, suggesting that she had likely been assaulted. The discovery of Sierra's phone and clothing led to a surge of local and international sympathy. The search effort, which had already intensified significantly in the days following her disappearance, received a fresh wave of support. Authorities received over 1,000 new tips, and officers worked more than 7,000 hours. Multiple search teams, comprising over 800 individuals, were deployed to thoroughly search the area. They systematically examined every available lake and reservoir, combed over fields, and searched abandoned buildings. Sierra's disappearance was a major topic of discussion in the community, with missing person posters put up everywhere. Her parents offered a $10,000 reward for any credible information leading to her safe return. Despite the efforts of the community and investigators, only a golf ball and a flipper were found. However, unbeknownst to the public, investigators were making progress in identifying a potential suspect. 12 days after Sierra's disappearance, on March 28, DNA analysis revealed that the DNA on her pants belonged to a local man. As part of the investigation, DNA samples from all 57 registered sex offenders in the Morgan Hill zip code were compared to the DNA evidence. Sierra's father, who had a criminal record, proactively contacted law enforcement and was quickly eliminated as a suspect. One of the local men who had not been ruled out as a suspect was Antolin Garcia Torres. Following a DNA match between the 21-year-old man and Sierra's pants, he came to public attention. At the time, he lived in Maple Leaf Recreational Vehicle Park with his mother, pregnant wife, and daughter, about 7 miles from Sierra's house. Antolin Garcia Torres had a troubling past, had a challenging upbringing marked by abuse and neglect. His father, who was abusive and often drunk, had threatened to kill him and his mother before being imprisoned for molesting a young family member. The father's abusive behavior appears to have been passed on to his son. Although 2009 allegations of having sex with a minor were dismissed, Antolin Garcia Torres's DNA was collected. He was also detained in 2010 for impeding police operations. Due to the suspicious relationship between he and Sierra, detectives put him under constant surveillance. As it was unclear whether Sierra was still alive, Antolin Garcia Torres was the most likely person to have information. To monitor his activities, police tapped his phone, placed a GPS tracker in his car, and had 2 undercover investigators move into a vehicle park next to his house. After discovering that the vehicle park had cameras at the front door, investigators began reviewing security footage from the neighborhood around Antolin Garcia Torres's residence. They examined a film taken on the day of Sierra's disappearance to determine whether Antolin had left or arrived home. It was discovered that Antolin had left the campground in his red Volkswagen Jetta at 7 a.m. on the morning she vanished. Given that his home was only 7 miles from Sierra, Antolin's travel time matched the period during which Sierra could have been kidnapped. Although Antolin had left for work at the usual time, Safeway's shift records showed that he did not arrive at work on Sierra went missing. It was found that 3 years prior, there were 3 unsuccessful kidnapping attempts in the Safeway parking lot. But none of the perpetrators were identified or detained. The only evidence from these attempts was a taser dropped by the perpetrator, which had a fingerprint on one of its batteries. However, it was only a partial fingerprint, requiring a direct 1-to-1 comparison to match. The idea seemed promising, but when Antoline's fingerprints were compared to those on the taser, a surprising revelation emerged. In reality, their suspect was indeed Antoline. Antoline was taken into custody by investigators after being positively identified as someone who was present when Sierra went missing. His DNA was found on her pants, and he had a history of involvement in kidnappings. This evidence was enough to detain him for questioning and to seize his vehicle for further DNA testing. During the interview, the suspect, Antoline, showed arrogance and was dismissive of the questions. He claimed that on the day Sierra vanished, he had gone fishing and didn't know who she was. He was confident that the investigators wouldn't find any evidence against him. However, before the interview ended, Antoline made a strange revelation. He admitted to having a habit of strangling a snake while driving and then throwing the tissue out the window. He also claimed to have thrown out a used tissue in the exact spot where Sierra's bag was found on the morning she went missing. We already had a 1 in a million chance with the rain on Sierra's phone, and the police didn't believe Antoline's implausible explanation either. On May 21, 2012, Antoline Garcia Torres was formally detained in connection with Sierra Lamar's disappearance outside his workplace in a Safeway parking lot. This was the result of several distinct links between Sierra and Antoline's vehicle. A DNA test found her DNA on the interior door handle of the car's rear door. Additionally, fibers from the car seats matched those found on Sierra's clothing, and a piece of rope inside the car contained a strand of her hair. This proved beyond a doubt that she had been in his car at some point. However, even after his arrest, there was a significant issue. Despite the apparent evidence, Sierra's body had yet to be found. Could they accuse Antoline of first-degree murder without a body or verified death? In reality, Santa Clara County District Attorney Jeff Rosen announced on May 19, 2014, that he would seek the death penalty against Antoline. Although Antoline had previously pleaded not guilty to killing Sierra, the overwhelming evidence pointed to his guilt. Antoline's trial began on January 30, 2017, after being delayed. The trial was prolonged and stressful for all parties involved, with the prosecution and defense presenting lengthy arguments over 13 weeks of testimony. Antoline's defense team argued that his exposure to pesticides from surrounding fields during his childhood may have impaired his cognitive abilities. They claimed that this exposure was not his fault and, as a result, he should not be eligible for the death penalty. The defense argued that Antoline faced a unique disadvantage due to circumstances beyond his control. In a final attempt, Antoline's defense team requested a new trial, questioning the chief investigator's reliability and honesty, and alleging that he had tampered with evidence in the past. However, this attempt was denied. The jury convicted Antoline Garcia Torres of Sierra Lamar's first-degree murder on May 9, 2017. The evidence was so overwhelming against Antoline that he was unable to escape responsibility for his acts, even though Sierra's body has never been located. Outside of the evidence offered, Antoline was formally given a life sentence without the chance of parole after being spared the death penalty. Since his sentencing, Antoline has stayed largely silent, and despite receiving hundreds of letters from news organizations and total strangers, only one letter has been answered. Antoline wrote, "I hold fast to my innocence, and I'm not going to talk about the matter." It's puzzling why Annalyn continues to claim innocence despite the overwhelming evidence against him. The presence of his DNA on Sierra's belongings, her DNA in his car, his past crimes, and a detailed timeline all clearly indicate his involvement in Sierra's disappearance. The search for Sierra Lamar is believed by some organizers to be the longest continuous search for a missing person in U.S. history. It spanned 3 years, with over 1,100 searches conducted within a 15-mile radius, totaling 50,000 man-hours of effort. Volunteers braved extreme weather conditions, from scorching summers to cold winters, in their quest for any information about Sierra. Despite the passing of time, many volunteers continue to search for her, driven by the desire to bring closure to her family, even though they acknowledge the likelihood of her being deceased. Currently, the whereabouts of Sierra's body remain unknown, but the hope is that one day, the Lamar family will find the closure they seek. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Samadi Fonseca Fernandez. Samadi Fonseca Fernandez was born in Costa Rica in February 1975. Not much is known about her early family life. Samadi grew up in Cuba, where she lived with her mother, Sonia Fonseca. She attended a local school. Samadi often used force or deception to get what she wanted. Samadi's striking looks and perfect figure make her a magnet, especially to men. Samadi's beauty and charm are overshadowed by her greed, vanity, and self-interest, which ultimately drives men away. Furthermore, she is extremely jealous and aggressive. Samadi, due to her youthful resemblance to Barbie, spent several years working at a Universal Company bookstore, dressing up as the iconic doll. After graduating from high school, Samadi started a long-term relationship with Osvaldo Fernando Ballery, a local television journalist 16 years her senior. Their relationship resulted in the birth of children, Christopher in 1996 and Christina a year later. However, constant arguments and jealousy eventually led Samadi to end the relationship in 2012. Shortly after, Osvaldo, 53, died suddenly. Osvaldo did not include Samadi in his will. Samadi took drastic action and seized Osvaldo's house, changing the locks to prevent relatives and heirs from entering. Samadi also took away Osvaldo's valuables. Osvaldo's family was furious and took Samadi to court for theft. Police intervened and forced Samadi to leave the house, but no criminal charges were filed against her. Samadi had other relationships, most notably with Miguel Angel Perez, the father of Samadi's third daughter, Maria. Although some reports claim the couple were officially married, the relationship ended in divorce after a few years. It was strange that some of Samadi's lovers disappeared or died mysteriously under mysterious circumstances. But for a long time, for some reason, no one paid any attention to it. Another former lover, Diaco, met a tragic end after breaking up with Samadi. He was murdered during a robbery. The killers were never caught or brought to justice. As with the previous case, there was much speculation surrounding Samadi's possible involvement, but there was no solid evidence linking her to the crime. Samadi's most famous victim was Gerardo Cruz. Gerardo Cruz, a native of Costa Rica, was born in December 1992 in the city of San Jose. Gerardo Cruz lived with his mother, Ana Patricia, who soon married a man named Hermes Rodriguez, who raised Gerardo Cruz as his own son. Gerardo Cruz he attended a regular school, developed a passion for motorcycles, and met his future partner, Carol, at a young age. By the time he was 23, Gerardo had settled down with Carol and their 4-year-old daughter, Genesis, in the suburban home of his aunt and uncle in San Sebastian. To support his family, Gerardo Cruz took a job at a local bakery. It was around this time, in the summer of 2015, that Gerardo Cruz met Samadi, a 40-year-old woman who frequented the bakery. Despite her age, Samadi was attractive. Samadi began having affairs with men much younger than herself, because the attention of young lovers probably delighted Samadi. Gerardo Cruz was one such affair. Despite the significant age difference, Gerardo Cruz quickly fell in love with Samadi and began to meet secretly. Samadi came to the bakery every day to see Gerardo Cruz, and other employees took notice of Samadi's frequent visits. Samadi would bring his 19-year-old daughter, Christina, with him to the bakery. Initially, Gerardo Cruz was able to balance his family life and secretly date Samad without either woman finding out. He eventually let his guard down. He began bragging about his success with women and began sharing stories with friends and colleagues about Samadi, describing her as a great mistress who showered him with gifts. After just a few months together, in October 2015, Samadi discovered the truth about Gerardo Cruz having a pregnant wife and a child. Samadi was so angry that she started calling and texting Carol, Gerardo Cruz's wife, insulting her and threatening to kill Gerardo Cruz if he didn't belong to her. Gerardo Cruz tried to beg Carol's forgiveness. As for Samadi, he did not take her threat seriously, believing that she would quickly calm down and find a new boyfriend. Just days after breaking up with Samadi, Gerardo Cruz saw a man secretly filming a young girl's underwear with his phone. Gerardo Cruz filmed the man, stopped the girl, and advised her to report the incident to the police. He then chased the man, trying to capture his face on camera, until the man escaped in a taxi. Gerardo Cruz posted the video online and it quickly went viral. The man was identified as Luis Somano Delgado, a former member of the Ministry of Finance. The media picked up the story, and Gerardo Cruz became a national celebrity, outing Luis Somano Delgado in interviews. However, Luis Somano Delgado's lawyer accused Gerardo Cruz of wrongdoing, claiming that the video's distribution was illegal and preparing to file a lawsuit. Gerardo Cruz was surprised, wondering why he was being prosecuted instead of the man who committed the crime. Gerardo Cruz gave a radio interview confidently, without fear. The next day, he canceled his meeting with Oswald, citing an emergency after receiving a text message from Samadi, supposedly to discuss another interview with a young woman in a park. Unsuspecting, Gerardo Cruz met with her, but instead of journalists, two men stole his bag, beat him, and stabbed him multiple times. Gerardo Cruz called Oswald when he was unconscious, and Oswald called the police and paramedics. Gerardo Cruz was taken to the hospital, where doctors fought to save his life for 42 days. Gerardo Cruz underwent numerous operations, but unfortunately, they were unsuccessful in saving his life. He passed away in the intensive care unit on November 19. Gerardo Cruz's funeral was attended by a large number of people who wanted to express their condolences to his family. The community came together to express their hope that the police would quickly apprehend the perpetrators and bring them to justice. Initially, the investigation explored multiple theories. The first was that Cruz was a victim of a robbery gone wrong. This seemed plausible, given that he was attacked in a park, his bag was stolen, and he was stabbed with a knife. The first theory is that Gerardo Cruz was the victim of a botched robbery, as he was attacked in a park, his bag stolen, and stabbed. However, Gerardo Cruz recently released a video exposing a nationally known former official, which has fueled another theory, that the attack was a revenge killing. The media speculated that the former official, Somano Delgado, may have hired a hitman to silence Gerardo Cruz, who had tarnished his reputation. The murder has sparked widespread debate in the press. Police later identified and tracked down the two men. The footage was made public and shown repeatedly on news programs, with viewers encouraged to watch the footage closely. Soon after, the identity of one suspect was confirmed when he voluntarily surrendered to the police, cooperating with the investigation in hopes of receiving a reduced sentence. The investigation quickly identified several accomplices and organizers of the crime, Samadi and her daughter Cristina, thanks to information provided. Those involved, including taxi driver Ronald Archie, worker Cesar Chavez, a young miner, and Omar Costa, were arrested. The investigation revealed the roles and connections of all those involved in the crime through phone calls and text messages. Samadi was identified as the mastermind, who had carefully planned the murder for his daughter Cristina. They enlisted the help of friends Ronald Archie and Cesar Chavez to find two assassins to kill Gerardo Cruz and stage a robbery in the park at night. Omar Costa later joined the plot, tasked with ensuring Gerardo Cruz was present at the park. Samadi chose October 7 as the date of the massacre. Samadi kept in constant contact with all the suspects, assigning roles and ensuring everyone followed the plan. Furthermore, Samadi asked the participants to take an item from Gerardo Cruz as proof that the crime had been completed. The evidence against Samadi was a series of text messages outlining the murder plan and the roles of each participant in detail. The motive behind the crime was a case of jealousy. She had carefully planned the crime and even involved her own daughter, who assisted her in every step of the process. Both Samadi and her daughter were taken into custody immediately, and the possibility of releasing them on bail was ruled out due to concerns that they would attempt to flee the country. Their accomplices were also detained, except for Omar Costa, who was responsible for surveillance and was the youngest participant in the crime. As a minor, Omar Costa was handed over to authorities that specialize in handling juvenile offenders. The investigation took about a year and a half to complete, and the trial did not begin until December 2017. It was discovered that Samadi had a history of criminal activity. The verdict was not announced until January 23, 2018. According to the court decision, Samadi was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Her daughter, as well as Ronald Archie and Cesar Chavez, received 25 years in prison each. Omar Costa, on the other hand, who had been following the victim, was acquitted. Gerardo Cruz's family has received $140,000 in moral damages. After the verdict was announced, relatives expressed gratitude to the court for giving Gerardo Cruz's killers a fair punishment. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Mike Williams. Jerry Michael Williams was born on October 16, 1969, in Bradfordville, just north of Tallahassee. His parents worked as a bus driver and a kindergarten teacher. To those close to him, he was known as Mike. Despite financial struggles, which led to Mike and his older brother being raised in a trailer, but their childhood was filled with happiness. Furthermore, Mike's parents prioritized their son's education, setting aside money for their future instead of building a new home. Both boys attended North Florida Christian High School, where Mike excelled academically and socially. He served as student council president, played soccer, and actively participated in the Key Club. At 15, Mike developed a passion for duck hunting and met Denise Merrill, a cheerleader and council secretary. They began dating and formed a close bond. Their friends viewed Mike and Denise as a well-suited couple. During high school, Denise introduced Mike to Brian Winchester, and they became inseparable friends. Brian later befriended Kathy Thomas, and the two couples remained lifelong friends. After graduating from high school, Mike attended Florida State University, where he studied political science and urban planning. Denise and Mike graduated together, with Denise becoming a public accountant and Mike pursuing a career as a real estate appraiser. Mike was a hardworking individual who consistently put in 15-hour days, which ultimately led to his rapid career advancement. His personal life also flourished, as he married Denise in 1994. Around the same time, his friend Brian married Kathy. The two couples remained close friends. Mike was deeply devoted to his wife and worked tirelessly to provide for their family, exhibiting remarkable enthusiasm and dedication. At 31, Mike Williams was thriving as a real estate appraiser, earning nearly $200,000 annually. He and his wife lived in a small upscale neighborhood on the east side of town, and welcomed a daughter, Ensley, in 1999. Despite engaging in risky activities, but he was always cautious and wanted to ensure that his family would be well provided for in the event of an emergency. He turned to his best friend, Brian, an insurance agent, to purchase 2 insurance policies, one for $250,000 and another for $500,000. After his father's sudden death in 2000, Mike felt a strong need to secure his family's financial future, so he turned to a friend for help again. Brian assisted him in obtaining a life insurance policy with a value of $1 million. 6 months before Mike disappeared, he bought life insurance worth nearly $2 million. On December 16, 2000, Mike woke up early to go duck hunting on Lake Seminole, a large reservoir connected to the Apalachicola River. It was Mike's 6th wedding anniversary, and he planned to celebrate with his wife Denise that night. However, when Denise and their daughter waited for Mike to return home at noon, he failed to show up. Denise became concerned and called her father. Her father then contacted Mike's best friend, Brian Winchester. Brian and his father went to Lake Seminole, where they found Mike's Ford Bronco parked near the boat dock, but there was no sign of Mike. They searched the areas where Mike liked to hunt but couldn't find him or his boat. They decided to contact the police. Investigators from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Agency were called in, and a search for Mike began. Later, a helicopter pilot spotted the boat drifting 225 feet from the boat ramp. When the boat was searched, Mike's shotgun was found, still in its case, shows that he has not used it. The search operation shifted from rescue to recovery. Locals believe the area was once an orchard before the 3 rivers were dammed to create the lake. The lake was nicknamed Stump Field due to the numerous remaining tree stumps above and below the waterline, which posed a hazard to motorized boats. Searchers hypothesized that Mike's boat struck a stump, causing him to fall into the water. His boots, filled with water, may have weighed him down, leading to his possible drowning. Additional agencies, including a dive team from Montgomery, Alabama, and the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, joined the search. Despite a thorough search, but no signs of Mike were found. As the days passed, the operation transitioned from rescue to a body recovery mission. Search teams used probe poles to scour the lake's bottom, and service dogs were brought in to assist. 10 days after, a hunting hat with a camouflage pattern was found, but there was no evidence connecting it to Mike. Officials from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Agency speculated that Mike might have been consumed by alligators, which were abundant in the lake. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement found no evidence of foul play, reinforcing the theory that the incident was accidental. After a 5-week search, the effort to find Mike was halted. The following day, Denise organized a memorial service for her husband. Although Denise seemed to have accepted Mike's departure, his mother still found it difficult to accept. 6 months later, in June 2001, a fisherman discovered a pair of boots floating in the lake. A dive team searched the area and found a hunting jacket and a working flashlight on the lake floor. Inside the jacket pocket was Mike's hunting license, complete with his name and signature. The discovery raised several questions. Notably, neither the jacket nor the boots showed signs of an alligator attack, such as teeth marks. Additionally, none of the items appeared to have been in the water for 6 months, as the boots were not slimy. A week after the discovery, Denise's lawyer petitioned the court to declare Mike dead, citing the found items as evidence. The lawyers suggested that aquatic life, including alligators, might have consumed Mike's body entirely. The court approved this, and a death certificate was issued, stating that Mike died on December 16, 2000, due to accidental drowning while duck hunting on Lake Seminole. Mike's body was never recovered. Mike's mother, Cheryl Williams, continues to search for her son, although this causes tension in her relationship with Denise. Denise demanded Cheryl stop searching and accept reality, threatening that if she continued, she would never see her granddaughter again. Cheryl refused to give up. She was determined to find Mike. Her perseverance ultimately led to the reopening of the investigation into Mike's disappearance. It took Cheryl 3 years of tireless efforts, including making phone calls, putting up signs, writing to the governor of Florida, compiling evidence, and contacting reporters, to convince law enforcement officials to open an investigation into Mike's disappearance. Cheryl later revealed that her contacted Matthew Oresco, an expert on alligators. Orozco explained that alligators do not eat during the cold winter months due to low water temperatures, and their main priority is maintaining body heat. Temperatures as low as 14 degrees make alligators uninterested in food. Additionally, according to Orozco, alligator attacks always leave behind forensic evidence. 3 years later, Cheryl convinced law enforcement to dismiss the alligator theory and start a formal investigation into her son's disappearance. New discoveries regarding the behavior of alligators prompted a re-examination of the case. Evidence from interviews and data suggested that Mike's death was not an accident. Former investigator Ronnie Austin stated, "My instinct tells me Mike did not die in Lake Seol, and that's what most law enforcement agencies working on this case agree on." Austin worked on Mike's case at the 2nd District State's Attorney's Office. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Agency initially handled the case as a missing hunter incident. They dedicated 735 hours to searching a 10-acre area of the lake for Mike's body, but surprisingly they did not find any signs of crime. Years later, those involved in the search, including police officer David Arnett, who was present at the scene, expressed that several things seemed unusual from the start. Firstly, it was unusual for Mike to hunt alone. Additionally, his truck was found in an undeveloped area, which would have required him to drag the boat through mud, rather than using the nearby concrete boat launch that he typically used. The severe storm that night should have pushed the boat towards the east shore, but it was instead found on the west shore. Additionally, the boat's motor was not running, yet it was still full of gasoline. If Mike had been operating the boat and fallen out, the boat would have continued to float in circles until it ran out of fuel. Law enforcement initially believed Mike's death was a simple drowning, but they later began to suspect foul play. However, by that time, the crime scene had already been trampled by numerous volunteers and searchers. A vital piece of evidence, a vehicle, was taken by Mike's family without being inspected by investigators. Additionally, some potential witnesses were overlooked. Denise and Brian were identified as suspects when investigators found out that Brian had just gone through a divorce from his previous wife, Kathy, and then quickly married Denise. Furthermore, Denise had received nearly $2 million from Mike's life insurance policy. Detectives also found it suspicious that Brian had sold Mike the policy. The investigation raised more red flags when Denise, Mike's wife, showed no interest in helping with the investigation and tried to prevent Mrs. Cheryl from participating in search. Denise even prohibited Cheryl from speaking with her granddaughter. When questioned, Brian provided an alibi, claiming he was at home, 60 miles from the lake, on the morning of Mike's disappearance. His ex-wife, Kathy, corroborated his story. Brian also mentioned that he had planned to go hunting with his father-in-law that morning but overslept. Denise's interrogation did not reveal any new information. In 2008, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement concluded that Mike's disappearance was not an accident, which is a criminal offense. However, due to insufficient evidence, they were unable to prosecute. Despite this, Mike's mother, Cheryl Williams, continued to seek answers. The case was featured on the Discovery Cable channel in 2011, but Cheryl became increasingly frustrated with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, feeling that they were either incompetent or uninterested in solving the case. In 2012, she began writing daily letters to Governor Rick Scott, requesting that he either reassign the investigation to another agency or appoint a special prosecutor. Over the course of 9 years, Cheryl sent 2,600 letters to the governor. Meanwhile, Denise and Brian's marriage was deteriorating. In 2012, Denise discovered Brian's infidelity, leading to their breakup. Denise filed for divorce the following year. During the lengthy divorce proceedings, an appraisal of their former home was scheduled in an effort to resolve their property disputes. This brought progress in Mike's case, as tensions between Denise and Brian reached a boiling point. Brian wanted to continue the marriage, but Denise wanted a divorce because they were constantly arguing, and things were further complicated by the stress of Mike's investigation. Brian started calling Denise repeatedly, but she stopped answering his calls. He became overwhelmed by the stress in their relationship. On August 5, 2016, Denise was set to have her home appraised as part of a court order. That morning, she left her home to drive to work at Florida State University. While speaking with her sister on the phone, she noticed someone climbing over the back seat of her car. It was Brian. Brian pressed a loaded gun against Denise's and instructed her to drive straight ahead. Brian said he did this extreme thing because she had quit answering his phone calls. Denise attempted to calm Brian down by agreeing with him and promising to give their marriage another chance. Brian seemed to believe her. Denise assured him that she wouldn't report the incident to the police, and Brian exited the vehicle. As he left, he took several items with him, including a brown sheet, plastic sheeting, a bleach sprayer, and tools. It became clear that Denise had narrowly escaped a potentially fatal situation. She immediately called emergency services, and Brian was quickly arrested. He was charged with kidnapping, a first-degree felony in Florida that carries a maximum life sentence. He also faced charges of domestic violence and burglary. The court ordered Brian to be held without bail. Cheryl Williams expressed hope that Brian's arrest might lead to a breakthrough in her son's case. Cheryl shared with the New York Daily News, Brian did not want Denise to keep all that money for herself. Cheryl hoped Brian will reveal what really happened. And ultimately, Brian did share what had transpired. Brian managed to negotiate a very favorable deal with the prosecutor, avoiding a life sentence, and then began telling his story. He explained that it all started when he discovered a note in Kathy's purse, revealing that she was cheating on him. This sparked a desire for revenge in Brian. Around that time, Brian and his friends, including Denise and her husband Mike, would often go to bars and concerts together. Brian had known Denise since high school, but he had never been attracted to her until Kathy's infidelity. His perspective on Denise changed after being cheated on. In October 1997, Brian and Denise started an affair. Initially, it was just a casual encounter at a rock concert, but it quickly developed into regular and secret dates. They would meet at hotels during the workday whenever they had the chance. Brian made it clear that he did not want to divorce Kathy, and Denise was adamant that she would never leave her husband Mike, as she cared deeply about public opinion and did not want to risk losing custody of her daughter. As their relationship progresses, it deepens and they begin to consider themselves a couple, often exchanging gifts and writing romantic letters to each other. They realized they couldn't continue living like this, as they couldn't bear to be apart. However, Denise did not think about getting a divorce because she wanted people to think she was a good and moral person. Around this time, Mike had a near-death experience in a hunting accident, and Brian saved his life. This gave Denise a ray of hope that they could get out of their current situation. After negotiating the deal with the prosecutor, Brian revealed that in the year 2000, he and Denise started discussing the possibility of Mike and Kathy dying. Denise wanted to make it look like an accident rather than a murder. After considering various options, Brian and Denise planned to fake a boating accident. This would allow them to collect the maximum amount from Mike's life insurance policy before it expired at the end of December 2000. They devised a plan, and Brian invited Mike on a hunting trip to a spot on Lake Simal's shores, telling him to bring his wading boots. The boots were crucial, as it was believed that wearing them would lead to rapid drowning if Mike fell overboard. However, when Brian pushed Mike into the water, the plan didn't unfold as expected. Instead of sinking, Mike grabbed onto nearby stumps and began wading towards the shore. Brian was in a state of panic. He didn't know how to handle the situation. Mike was loudly calling for help, and Brian felt overwhelmed. In his panic, Brian grabbed his shotgun and shot Mike in the head without thinking. The plan had gone terribly wrong, and now Brian had to cover up the incident. Time was running out because he had to go home and prepare for a hunting trip with his father-in-law. Since no one knew Brian was at the lake with Mike, he decided to return home and pretend he had overslept. He drove back, hoping to find his wife, Kathy, still asleep. Brian entered the house quietly, finding Kathy asleep and his phone on the floor. He went to bed, called his father-in-law to apologize, and began creating an alibi for himself. Meanwhile, he hid Mike's body. Denise didn't know what really happened when Mike went missing. Brian attempted to confess to her, but she refused to listen. She preferred to believe that Mike's disappearance was an act of God, allowing her to move on with her life. According to Brian, he and Denise made a promise to each other to keep the truth hidden forever. Denise and Brian claimed that Mike's death was necessary because they couldn't live together. They stated that the life insurance payout was just an added benefit. Brian would later testify in court. However, investigators discovered that Brian had planted evidence, including a hat, boots, flashlight, and license, to mislead searchers and create false evidence to declare Mike dead, allowing Denise to collect the insurance. Denise received around $2 million, including Social Security and other benefits. On May 8, 2018, Denise was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and accessory to a felony, carrying a life sentence. She pleaded not guilty to all charges. In February 2019, Denise was sentenced to life in prison. 5 months later, her daughter Ansley received Mike's assets and insurance payout. Denise appealed the conviction and life sentence in January 2020. Her attorney arguing before the Florida First District Court of Appeal that there was no evidence of her direct involvement in the murder. In November 2020, Denise's murder conviction was overturned. However, her 30-year sentence for conspiracy to commit murder was upheld, and she is currently serving her sentence at the Florida Women's Reception Center. Denise is expected to be released when she is 78 years old. Brian was transferred to the Madison Correctional Institute in Florida to serve the remainder of his sentence. He is scheduled to be released on July 30, 2036, when he will be 67 years old. Ansley, Mike and Denise's daughter, maintains her mother's innocence and blames Brian. Ansley has refused to speak to the media about the case and personal life. According to Cheryl and Nick, Ansley's uncle, they have been unable to reconnect with Ansley. Cheryl expressed her sorrow, stating that she has not only lost her son but also her connection with her granddaughter. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Ellen Greenberg. Ellen Greenberg was born in June 1993 in New York to Santa and George Greenberg. She is an only child and grew up in a loving environment. During her high school years, she was very active in sports. Ellen was very sociable and also did well in her studies. After finishing high school, she attended Pennsylvania State University. However, when she started working in her field, Ellen realized that it was not her true passion. While working, Ellen also enrolled in a correspondence course at a teacher training academy. A few years later, she successfully completed her degree and moved to Philadelphia, where she became a junior high school teacher at a local school. Ellen's life was going well. She truly enjoyed working with her students. During this time, Ellen began a relationship with a young man named Samuel, also known as Sam Goldberg. He came from a wealthy and prominent family. Samuel's parents owned a large business and his uncle was known as one of the best lawyers in the state. Ellen and Samuel met at a party in 2009 through friends and quickly developed feelings for each other. Their relationship quickly developed and they later decided to live together. In 2011, Samuel proposed to Ellen with a diamond ring. The happy couple began planning their wedding, scheduled for the spring of that year. In January 2011, Ellen went to work at school as usual, but around noon, a strong wind and snowstorm caused classes to be canceled and both students and teachers were sent home. Ellen returned to her apartment, and then suddenly, Samuel also returned home. At 5 p.m., Samuel decided to go to the gym in their apartment complex. Samuel was gone for less than an hour, but when he returned, he found the apartment door locked from the inside and could not be entered. Samuel knocked loudly on the door and called Ellen's name. He then tried calling and texting Ellen, but there was no response. Samuel went down to the first floor to ask the security guard for help. Samuel explained the situation and asked the guard to open the door first. But the guard said that it was against his rules because he could not leave his post. Samuel then returned to his floor. He banged his shoulder on the door, and on his first try, he broke the latch. It was very quiet inside. When he entered the kitchen, he saw a horrifying scene of Ellen lying on the floor, leaning against the cupboard door, her body stabbed multiple times and her clothes soaked in blood. Samuel quickly called an ambulance. When asked to check Ellen's pulse, Samuel hesitated and kept wondering if he really needed to do so. After a moment of silence, Samuel suddenly said that there was a knife protruding from Ellen's chest. Police arriving at the scene were surprised to find the door locked from the inside with a bolt, which Samuel had pushed open with his shoulder. There was no sign of forced entry or any intruder in the room. Nothing had been stolen from the apartment. During Ellen's autopsy, there were no signs of struggle or any attempt to defend herself, suggesting that the incident occurred suddenly and the victim had no time to react. Ellen's autopsy found about 20 stab wounds of varying depth, the fatal stab wound to her heart. Ellen struggled with anxiety and panic attacks. The situation became so severe that she sought the help of a psychologist. The initial assumption of the police, before the autopsy, was that Ellen had committed suicide. Ellen's therapist prescribed 2 anti-anxiety medications, which she took regularly. The psychologist confirmed that the medications would not affect Ellen's mental state or lead to thoughts of death. Despite her anxiety, Ellen never voiced such thoughts. Additionally, Ellen's friends and colleagues noticed that after she and Samuel began living together, her behavior began to change. Along with becoming anxious and restless, Ellen's parents also noticed similar strange behavior. 3 weeks before the tragedy, Ellen told her mother that she wanted to quit school, give up everything, and move back in with her parents. Her mother was surprised by this and assured Ellen that she could come home at any time. After the couple moved in together, Samuel began to act violently toward Ellen, leaving her fearful and reluctant to speak up. Ellen's psychologist noted that Ellen had difficulty expressing her feelings and experiences. It seemed as though she wanted to reveal something important, but fear held her back. The lack of care in the examination of the crime scene and body, as well as the subsequent investigation, was astonishing. Many important details, events, and evidence were overlooked or lost, making it impossible to reconstruct the full details of the incident. Initially, there were no defensive wounds on Ellen's hands. Many bruises were found on her body, and the degree of healing suggested that they had occurred several weeks ago. Samuel claimed that these injuries could have been caused by playing sports. However, Ellen's parents said that their daughter had not been to the gym or the playground for quite some time. Soon after the investigation began, the possibility of suicide was raised. Ellen had approximately 20 penetrating wounds of varying depths, and forensic analysis showed that 10 of these wounds were from the back. If Ellen had been attacked from behind and suffered serious injuries, even if they did not kill Ellen immediately, they would have likely limited her ability to move and resist. It is highly unlikely that someone would inflict such wounds on themselves and then stab themselves deep into the heart, leading medical experts to question the cause of death. The investigation still did not result in criminal charges. As there was no trace of a stranger in the apartment, nor any sign of self-defense. Although the victim's wife or partner is often the prime suspect in these cases, Samuel was never a suspect. No charges were ever brought against Samuel, and he was only questioned at the police station on the day of the incident, along with his uncle, a prominent lawyer. The events of that day were reconstructed entirely from Samuel's account, which was sometimes unclear. But he attributed his confusion to stress. Neighbors reported only that they heard knocking and screaming from Samuel when he could not get into the apartment and was trying to call Ellen. Samuel claimed that he asked a security guard for help, that the security guard accompanied him down the stairs, and that the security guard witnessed Samuel kicking down a door. However, the security guard denied this claim, claiming that he never left his post. Regardless, the police did not look into the matter further, considering it irrelevant. Only a surveillance camera leading to the gym was examined, which showed Samuel walking toward the gym and then returning. Samuel may have escaped by another route and then returned to the gym the same way. However, his alibi was not investigated, and witnesses who confirmed that Samuel was working out were not sought. The police officer who responded to the call noticed that Samuel was acting unusually, even though he was screaming and crying loudly. The expert suspected that he was faking his panic and anxiety. Importantly, before calling the police, Samuel contacted his parents and his uncle, a lawyer. His uncle arrived at the apartment before the police arrived to give a statement. Samuel went to the police station with his uncle. Furthermore, the next day, Samuel returned to the sealed apartment with his uncle to retrieve some personal belongings. Samuel took 2 laptops, a phone, and a tablet from Ellen. A few days later, the police decided to examine the devices and discovered that their search history included topics related to suicide. When the police arrived at the scene, they conducted only a preliminary examination and concluded that Ellen had committed suicide. Despite new information that later emerged, the police refused to change their verdict. The sequence of the injuries remains unclear, but it has been confirmed that the final wound was to the heart. The medical examiner found this odd and decided to investigate further. They sent a sample of Ellen's spine to a specialist who could assess the condition of the spinal cord. If the spinal cord was damaged, it would indicate that Ellen was paralyzed and could not have stabbed herself in the heart. Soon after, the police suddenly changed their minds and stopped the investigation, stating that, according to the report, there was no spinal cord injury. However, this conclusion was not added to the case file. It was also not noted that although there were many serious injuries on Ellen's body, there was very little blood, suggesting that someone might have wiped it away. No one actively looked for any signs of blood that had been wiped away. Additionally, the apartment's trash bins had not been checked, meaning any potential evidence inside was lost forever. Samuel's family, who were the first to arrive on the scene, notified Ellen's parents of their daughter's death. Ellen's family, who lived several hundred miles away, quickly arrived on the scene. Ellen's parents received no clear explanation of what happened that night involving Ellen. They were given only vague conclusions and were told that no criminal investigation would be initiated. Ellen's parents then chose to conduct an investigation, bringing in independent experts. Shortly thereafter, a private investigator contacted them and offered to assist them for free, as he wanted to shed light on this puzzling case. The detective examined the evidence and concluded that Ellen's body had been moved after her death. He also discovered smears on the floor that looked like drag marks. Additionally, when reviewing the case, the security guard recalled that Samuel, who had asked for help, was wearing a tracksuit and said he had just come from the gym, when in fact he was wearing boots. Despite this new evidence and witness testimony, Ellen's parents were once again denied a criminal case and no further investigation was conducted. Ellen's parents were not allowed access to important case files. 4 years later, a young police officer joined the unit as an assistant prosecutor. After learning about this unusual unsolved case while in college, he decided to look into the archives to uncover the truth. His attention was drawn to the wound at the back of the head, which might have been the first sign that Ellen had been attacked from behind when she was not expecting it. He was concerned to note that there was no spinal cord injury, but there was no official document to prove it. He assumed it was lost somewhere in the archives. He later formally requested a copy of the document from the forensic center, and it turned out that no one had ever come to such a conclusion and the body had not been examined for spinal cord injury. A fragment of the spine was surprisingly preserved and could be re-examined. An independent specialist assessed it and found that the spinal cord had sustained damage in multiple areas, indicating that Ellen could not have caused any additional injuries to herself. The findings were submitted to the police, but after reviewing them again, they decided not to pursue criminal charges. In 2018, the medical examiner concluded that Ellen had inflicted all 20 of her injuries on herself. The investigation reached a dead end. In their grief, the parents hired a new lawyer and together they gathered all the previously undocumented documents, evidence, facts, and witness statements. In 2019, they filed a new lawsuit against the medical examiner and the police. The following spring, the case was accepted and settled, but the trial never took place due to the global pandemic. Due to negligence by the police and medical examiners, important evidence was lost forever. Ellen's parents created a social media page to track the progress of the investigation, sharing official documents, new information, and updates. Ellen's family, friends, and colleagues are convinced that she could not have killed herself, especially not in such a brutal way. In the summer of 2022, the case was dismissed again, and Ellen's parents successfully appealed to the district attorney's office, where a new prosecutor took over. The investigation was restarted 11 years after the tragic events, but to this day it remains unsolved. During the first year after the tragedy, Samuel tried to keep in touch with Ellen's family. However, he did not participate in their investigation and refused to communicate with the police. He seemed to have no interest in the case, as Samuel accepted Ellen's death as a suicide. Samuel got married a year later. He and his wife moved to another state and cut ties with Ellen's family. They are now raising 2 children together. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of the Roman family. Jean-Claude Roman was born on February 11, 1954 in Laas, France, and grew up in Claques, Jura. He received his baccalaureate in 1971. He began his studies at Lycée du Parc in Lyon but dropped out after 1 semester. He then enrolled in medical school. Florence Cray was born on March 6, 1956. She pursued a medical degree at the University of Lyon, where she met Jean-Claude Roman, a distant cousin of her family. Initially, they didn't have a strong connection and barely spent time together. However, through mutual friends and study sessions, they gradually grew closer. Jean-Claude was attracted to Florence and he made an effort to win her over. In return, Florence considered him an ordinary person, not particularly outstanding. Her ideal partner was someone who combined the typical qualities of a doctor: intelligent, charming, and attractive. After failing her second exam, Florence decided to switch from medicine to pharmacy. Jean-Claude and her friend Luc Ladmiral also supported her decision. The 3 of them maintained the habit of studying, taking exams, and supporting each other for a long time, finally graduating in 1980. Florence and Jean-Claude then married, and 6 years later they welcomed their first daughter, Caroline. 2 years later they had a son, Antoine, after Caroline was born. Florence lived a normal life as a wife and mother, working part-time locally to support her family. Her husband, Jean-Claude Roman, worked for the World Health Organization in Geneva, near their home in France. In late December 1992, Florence was out running errands in Fère, France. Her children, Caroline and Antoine, were at school, and Jean-Claude was at work in Geneva. It was a normal day, with Florence still thinking about their recent Christmas celebrations. While she was out, she met the school principal. They exchanged holiday greetings and began discussing their Christmas experiences. The conversation eventually turned to an incident involving Florence's husband. The principal mentioned that the principal had been demoted due to an affair with a teacher, which led to a school board meeting. Her husband, John Claude, also served on the school board, so the principal wanted to discuss the matter with John Claude, so the principal's secretary tried to find John Claude's contact information in the World Health Organization directory, since John Claude worked there. However, Jean Claude's name was not found, which the principal found strange. Florence laughed it off, but she was also curious. Florence assured the principal that there must be a good reason why Jean Claude's name and phone number were not listed, and she promised to raise the matter with Jean Claude when he got home from work. Jean Claude and his acquaintances have lost touch. He keeps his professional life private, sharing very little with family and friends. His wife, Florence, believes he is a respected researcher in the medical field, but she knows little about his work, and Florence does not even have his office phone number. If Florence needed to contact him urgently, she would page him, and he would call her back as soon as possible. When friends asked Florence about Jean Claude's role at the World Health Organization, WHO, she would laugh and admit that she wasn't sure. Sometimes, she would jokingly speculate that he might be a secret spy. In 1992, Florence discovered that the WHO hosted an annual Christmas tree event, where staff members could bring their families to decorate a tree together. What surprised her was that Jean Claude had never mentioned this event to her. Florence was deeply disturbed by the recent events surrounding her husband. First, the school president revealed that her husband was not listed in the WHO directory, despite his claims of working there. Then, she discovered that a significant family event had taken place at his workplace over a decade ago, which he had never mentioned to her. These discoveries likely weighed heavily on Florence's mind. However, during the holiday season, Florence's brother visited the family and noticed a profound sadness surrounding Florence. As the new year, 1993, began, Florence and Jean Claude spent time together, going shopping. During their outing, Florence insisted that Jean Claude buy himself a new suit. On January 5, Jean Claude withdrew a total of 2,000 francs from 2 different ATMs. He then gave 500 francs to a homeless person he met before going to a gun store. At the gun store, Jean Claude purchased tear gas canisters, cartridges, a silencer for a .22 caliber rifle, and a stun wand. Jean Claude returned home, however, on January 11 at 4 a.m., a frantic call was made to the fire brigade, reporting a fire at the house. Garbage collectors on their early morning rounds discovered the house on fire and immediately alerted the fire brigade. The firefighters rushed to the scene and began extinguishing the flames. While they were working, they noticed someone moving in the upstairs bedroom window, indicating that the person was seeking help. Medical personnel were called, and the person, who was Jean Claude, was rescued from the burning house. After being rescued, Jean Claude was found unresponsive and in shock. Paramedics immediately attended to him, and he was taken to the hospital, where he eventually fell into a coma. The fire was quickly extinguished, allowing first responders to enter the premises. A family friend, Dr. Luc Ladmiral, was called to the scene and was met with the devastating sight of the charred remains of Antoine, Caroline, and Florence being carried out on stretchers. When a household fire results in fatalities, the police typically launch an investigation to determine the cause of the fire and rule out any potential criminal activity. In this case, due to the significant loss of a prominent doctor's family, law enforcement authorities began an investigation into the tragic fire at the Roman residence. During the examination of Florence's remains, the medical team found evidence of blunt force trauma to the back of her skull, which raised suspicions and sparked an investigation. Further examination revealed that Florence did not die from the fire, but from the blunt force trauma. The examination of the children also yielded a disturbing discovery. Caroline and Antoine did not die in the fire, but were shot hours before the fire started. This new information indicates that the cause of death occurred before the house caught fire. As a result, the police have opened an investigation into the suspicious deaths of Florence and her children. However, Jean-Claude is in a coma and unable to provide any information, so the police have to look for other leads. Florence's home became a crime scene and police began interviewing relatives, acquaintances, and neighbors to find out what had happened to the family. As part of the investigation, police also contacted Luc Ladmiral, the doctor who witnessed the victims being taken from the scene. Luc had no idea what was going on, and Luc had no clue who the Florence family had enemies when asked by the police. Luc still couldn't think of anyone who might want to harm them. However, Luc was asked to come in for questioning again a few days later. During this questioning, the police asked Luc about the family's relationships and any recent events that might have led to the fire. After a thorough questioning, the police still couldn't find any reason to believe that the family had any enemies or that anything unusual had happened before the fire. The investigation then turned to Jean-Claude, and what they discovered was horrifying. Jean-Claude had never actually worked for the World Health Organization, nor had he ever lectured at the University of Dijon. In fact, he wasn't even a qualified doctor. Luc is initially skeptical, but as he thinks back to his time studying with Jean-Claude, he begins to realize that something is wrong. Luc recalls a specific incident from his second year when Jean-Claude was absent from an exam, and Luc visited Jean-Claude at home and found him unwell, with clammy skin, a pale complexion, and dark circles under his eyes. Jean-Claude confided in Luc that he was battling lymphoma, a cancer that had been under control but worsened by the stress of the exam. Luc promised to keep this a secret, especially from Florence, as Jean-Claude had asked him to. The police were unable to obtain any significant information from Luc, so they decided to wait for the results of the forensic tests on the victims. The police noticed several unusual things about the house. All the doors were locked from the inside, indicating that no one had broken in. At first, the main theory was that the fire was an accident. However, the condition of the bodies made them consider other possibilities. The findings pointed to a more complex and sinister scenario, therefore, it was necessary to interrogate Jean-Claude. Since Jean-Claude had been in a coma for several weeks, the police made him their prime suspect and conducted a full investigation during that time. After verifying with the university, it was found that Jean-Claude had spent 12 years studying, passing his first-year exams but failing those in the second year. Since there were no restrictions on re-enrollment, Jean-Claude kept signing up for the second year, attending classes and studying medical texts for over a decade. What was puzzling was that he never managed to pass the second-year exam. Jean-Claude's uncle went to his parents' house to break the tragic news. When Jean-Claude's uncle entered the house, he found the bodies of Jean-Claude's mother and father dead, both shot with the same gun used to kill Antoine and Caroline. An autopsy confirmed that the gun was the same, and the estimated time of death suggested that the murders were related. The situation becomes even more mysterious after the tragedies become public. The police receive an anonymous call from a woman. She is reluctant to get involved in the investigation but has important information to share. She reveals that she had a romantic relationship with Jean-Claude after meeting him in Paris. She was also told that he was a researcher at the World Health Organization. The woman was misled into believing that Jean-Claude was involved in and funding major research projects. He also presented himself as having a significant position in Geneva's banks, making them seem very attractive. Jean-Claude convinced her to invest in a Swiss bank by offering an unusually high 18% interest rate. The woman eventually agreed to give Jean-Claude 990,000 francs to invest, expecting to receive her returns after 3 months. As the deadline approached in early January, she reminded Jean-Claude of their agreement, stressing that she urgently needed the funds to support herself and her family. After negotiating, Jean-Claude invited the woman to dinner with a well-known politician, which sparked her interest in recovering her investment. On the agreed day, Jean-Claude picked her up in Paris, and they began their journey. However, as night fell, they found themselves lost on the road. Jean-Claude suddenly stopped the car and attacked the woman with tear gas, a stun wand, and a cable in an attempt to subdue her. Despite being caught off guard, the woman fought back fiercely and managed to escape the vehicle. Jean-Claude chased after her but stopped when she begged for mercy. After his plan failed, Jean-Claude begged for forgiveness and used a familiar excuse with the woman, claiming that his lymphoma was acting up, causing his erratic behavior. The woman agreed not to talk about the incident. As the police looked into Jean-Claude, they began to see him as a con man and a manipulator. When Jean-Claude awoke from his coma, he was immediately approached by the police, who wanted him to confess, but Jean-Claude chose to remain silent. With a blank expression, he stared into space, reluctant to speak when the police asked him about the events of January 9th, the fire, the shooting of Antoine and Caroline, Florence's serious injuries, and the discovery of his dead parents. Despite repeated questioning, Jean-Claude revealed nothing. The truth about Jean-Claude's life was finally revealed to the police. That's when he decided to break his silence. The reasons for this sudden change are still unclear, but it marked the beginning of him speaking out. On the evening of January 9th, Jean-Claude and his wife Florence spent a typical night at home. After putting their children to bed, they went to their bedroom. However, Jean-Claude's memories of that night are unclear until he recalls a disturbing scene, finding his wife lying in a pool of blood on their bed, with a bloodied rolling pin in his hand. Confused about what had happened, Jean-Claude claims he didn't remember if an argument had occurred. He then went to sleep beside his wife's body. The next morning, he woke up and prepared breakfast for their children, Caroline and Antoine. He served them cereal and joined them to watch TV. When the children asked about their mother, Jean-Claude told them she was unwell and needed to rest. After breakfast, Jean-Claude urged Caroline to go upstairs to her bedroom. Jean-Claude then took out a .22 caliber rifle, equipped with a silencer, and shot his 7-year-old daughter Caroline in the back of the head, killing her. His son Antoine also met a similar tragic end. After the shootings, Jean-Claude left the house and went about his daily routine, appearing normal to those around him. He bought newspapers and watched television at home. However, Jean-Claude received a phone call from his parents inviting him to lunch, which he accepted. Jean-Claude drove to his parents' home and joined them for lunch. After lunch, Jean-Claude asked his father to go upstairs with him, saying Jean-Claude needed help with a faulty boiler pipe. Jean-Claude's elderly father checked the pipe at Jean-Claude's request. However, Jean-Claude shot his father in the back. He then went downstairs to his mother and shot her. Before leaving, Jean-Claude also shot the family dog. During the trial, when questioned about this, Jean-Claude showed a hint of remorse. Overcome with emotion, he broke down in tears, explaining that the dog was cherished by his children and reminded him of Caroline. This moment led Jean-Claude to decide to return home and take his own life. But his plan did not go as intended. Jean-Claude's former lover gave him 990,000 francs for an investment scheme, which he used to support himself. Jean-Claude told many people, including Florence's relatives and family, about the high returns from his investments, and they trusted him because they knew him. Jean-Claude gradually amassed a large sum of money from those who trusted him. To avoid detection by the tax authorities and others, Jean-Claude transferred the money to accounts in his own name in Geneva. Meanwhile, Jean-Claude managed the family finances, keeping his fraudulent activities a secret from Florence. Eventually, the inevitable happened, and it was time for Jean-Claude to face the consequences of his actions. As expected, those who had invested with Jean-Claude began to demand their money back, along with the promised returns. Despite having amassed over 2 million francs, Jean-Claude spent it all as soon as he had it to cover immediate expenses, leaving Jean-Claude with little to no savings. The inevitable day came when Jean-Claude had to confess the truth to Florence and the others who had entrusted him with money. Jean-Claude could no longer maintain the lie he had created. Feeling trapped and overwhelmed, he believes that ending his family's lives is a way to protect them from the consequences of his fraud. Jean-Claude then plans to commit suicide to avoid facing the reality of his situation. On June 23, 1996, Jean-Claude's trial began. Throughout the trial, Jean-Claude remained largely silent, sitting behind a glass partition with police on either side. On July 2, the court delivered its verdict. Jean-Claude was found guilty of murdering his wife, children, and parents. He was given a life sentence with no chance of parole for 22 years. After serving time in prison, Jean-Claude claimed to have become a devout Christian and expressed remorse for his actions. In 2019, Jean-Claude requested to be released from prison to live in a convent, where he could spend the rest of his life in repentance. The judge agreed to Jean-Claude's request. "Hey detectives, welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Rowena Irani." Rowena Irani was born on February 18, 1994, in Karachi, Pakistan, to parents Turan and Bam Irani. In 2004, when Rowena was 10 years old, her family moved to Wichita, Kansas, in search of better opportunities. The goal was to provide Rowena and her older brother, Rashid, with a brighter future in America. However, the 9.11 tragedy 3 years earlier had created a climate of prejudice that affected the Irani family, making it difficult for Rowena and Rashid to form friendships due to the hostility they faced. Despite the initial difficulties, Rowena and Rashid eventually settled in and expanded their social circle. Rowena joined her high school's ROTC program and drill team, which helped her develop skills, even though she didn't plan to pursue a military career. After a tough start, Rowena blossomed into a strong-willed, friendly, and caring individual. Rowena graduated from Wichita Heights High School in 2012 and enrolled at Wichita State University, choosing to live at home while pursuing a degree in psychology. Her goal was to earn a master's degree and become a counselor for teenagers. Rowena's mother was extremely proud of her dedication to her studies. From the start, the Irani family's sacrifices clearly had a positive impact on their children. Rowena, in particular, wanted to help others reach their full potential. She started working at the Wichita Children's Home, a place for neglected, abused, and emotionally distressed youth. Rowena formed strong bonds with the children, showing her remarkable ability to understand and support them. Rowena made the children feel welcome and cherished, creating a sense of security. Every morning, Rowena would gently wake the children, and every evening, she would bid them farewell. The children looked forward to sharing their daily experiences with her, no matter how small. Rowena also helped the children set goals and find ways to achieve them, showing her dedication to their well-being. Rowena demonstrated a strong commitment to helping troubled youth. And her outstanding academic record as a psychology major indicated she had found her purpose in supporting others. She seemed to be living the American dream her parents had sought. However, problems in her personal life soon arose, ultimately leading to a tragic outcome. In May 2016, Rowena reconnected with Dane Owens, a family friend, at her brother's wedding. Dane came from a wealthy Kansas family and had joined the U.S. Army after high school. His military service ended abruptly due to a severe traumatic brain injury from an explosion. After a medical discharge, Dane attended Kansas State University, where he met Rowena. They soon developed strong feelings for each other. But problems soon arose due to Dane's behavior. He was possessive, controlling, and had a quick temper. People close to Rowena said that Dane became obsessed with the idea of marrying her and starting a family right away, even though she wasn't sure about it. At 22, Rowena wanted to finish college before making such a big decision. Dane's insistence on marriage and his intense behavior scared Rowena, her feel like the relationship was moving too fast. When she asked for space, Dane wrote a disturbing letter, begging her not to leave him and hinting that he might harm himself if she did. This led Rowena to end the relationship. At first, it seemed like Dane accepted Rowena's decision when she reiterated that she wasn't ready for marriage or starting a family. However, just 1 week after giving her space, Dane started pressuring her again about getting engaged, planning a wedding, and having kids. His actions made it clear that he saw Rowena as a prize to be won. Instead of supporting her education and career, Dane seemed determined to limit Rowena to a domestic role. Rowena is worried about her relationship with Dane because she feels he is too controlling of her, and this makes her wonder if they are really a good couple. By September 2016, Dane's increasing aggression had become alarming, prompting Rowena to confide in her brother, Rashid, a police officer. She shared several disturbing incidents, including Dane's claims of committing brutal killings during his military service. He even bragged about murdering women and children while deployed in Afghanistan. Rowena found these revelations deeply disturbing. Furthermore, Dane had expressed his intention to kill an ex-girlfriend who had ended their relationship. He confessed that following the breakup, he became consumed by a desire for revenge and struggled with emotional instability, to the point where he even contemplated committing murder. Rashid agreed with Rowena's assessment that Dane posed a genuine threat and he seemed capable of violent acts against her. On September 23, Rowena ended her relationship with Dane. She blocked his phone number and social media profiles to distance herself. However, Dane refused to accept the breakup and started planning his revenge. Despite recovering from shoulder surgery and being unable to handle a firearm properly, Dane bought a .45 caliber handgun. On October 3, over a week after the breakup, he secretly visited Rowena's residence while her family was away. Surveillance cameras caught him parking his vehicle away from the house and approaching stealthily, hiding the firearm in a sling due to his injured arm. Dane entered the house through an unlocked door and waited for Rowena. When Rowena appeared, he aimed his gun and fatally shot her in the head. This was a deliberate and carefully planned violent act committed by someone who was excessively controlling. After shooting Rowena, Dane quickly left the house through the back door and drove away to avoid being caught. During his escape, he stopped to get rid of important evidence, including the handgun magazine and Rowena's phone, in various ponds in Wichita. Meanwhile, Rowena was left alone in her home, severely injured and bleeding heavily, for several hours. At around 4 p.m., her mother, Tarun, returned home after being dropped off from work. Tarun was worried because Rowena usually picked her up. But she couldn't reach Rowena by phone. She got a ride from a coworker and went home, where she found Rowena lying motionless on the floor, surrounded by a large amount of blood, with severe head injuries. Tarun immediately called for emergency services, but it was too late to save Rowena. Rowena's condition was extremely serious due to a gunshot wound and significant blood loss. She fought for her life at Wesley Medical Center for nearly 24 hours, while her family stayed by her side, hoping for a miracle. Tragically, she passed away on October 4 at just 22 years old. Her promising life was tragically ended by a violent act. Despite their intense grief, Rowena's family was determined to find justice for her murder. Rashid quickly focused the investigation on Dane, Rowena's ex-boyfriend, who had been causing her a great deal of fear before her death. Dane was soon found and brought in for questioning. After being arrested and taken to the police station, he admitted to holding a grudge against Rowena for breaking up with him. When questioned further, Dane tried to claim that Rowena's death was an accident, but the evidence proved this was not true. Dane told investigators that he had shown up at Rowena's home unannounced, carrying a loaded .45 caliber pistol and hoping to talk about getting back together. However, Dane claimed that the firearm was hidden in his arm sling and he never intended to threaten or harm Rowena when he entered the house looking for her. He said when Rowena suddenly appeared, he was startled, causing a moment of panic due to post-traumatic stress disorder from time in the military. Dean alleged that he accidentally fired a shot in her direction. He explained to detectives that he was left shocked and horrified after the bullet accidentally struck Rowena in the head, resulting in her immediate collapse to the ground. Panicked, he fled the scene and later got rid of the evidence. Despite his claim that the shooting was an accident caused by a reflex, detectives did not believe him. The security footage and his admission of sneaking up on Rowena with a loaded gun, his attempt to dispose of evidence, and the execution-style gunshot wound to Rowena's head all suggested a planned and deliberate murder. In November 2018, Dane Owens stood trial for Rowena's murder after years of delays, with the case being heard by a jury. The prosecution presented case with substantial evidence, leaving no doubt about Dane's guilt. They portrayed Dane as a possessive and controlling individual who turned violent when rejected. Dane's delusional fantasies led him to end Rowena's life. After only 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found Dane guilty of first-degree murder and aggravated burglary, resulting in a life sentence in Kansas. Dane was punished for taking Rowena's life due to his wounded pride. He will not be eligible for parole for 25 years, and his chances of release are low due to the brutality of his actions. He is currently serving his sentence at the Hutchinson Correctional Facility in Hutchinson, Kansas. Rowena's life was ended by someone she once loved. It's heartbreaking to think of the terrible actions of Dane, who took Rowena's life, depriving her of a bright future at such a young age. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Heather Maples. Heather Nicole Maples was born on August 23, 1992, in Ocala, Florida. Her mother, Jennifer Hunter, had called Heather the storm baby because she had always been full of energy and courage, which had made many people jealous. In 2004, Jennifer Hunter gave birth to her second child. Heather had been very happy to welcome her younger brother Ryan into her life. However, Ryan was later diagnosed with developmental delays. Heather spent all her free time taking care of Ryan, helping him learn to talk, walk, and eat. In the following years, Heather showed her love and devotion to her younger brother. Until her graduation, she devoted all her time to Ryan. At the age of 22, Heather Maples decided to leave her hometown of Texas and start a new chapter in Tennessee, where she pursued her dream of becoming a psychologist. Heather's journey began when she received a call from her old classmate, Chaz. He had invited her to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where he was studying. Chaz believed that this had been the perfect place for Heather, where she could get a good opportunity to prepare for college. Heather accepted the invitation and went to Murfreesboro in January 2015. There, she started a new life and her relationship with Chaz grew stronger and they became lovers. With the support of her best friend Kelsey, Heather found an office job in the area where they lived. She had to balance her work in college preparation, but everything seemed to be going well. However, Heather's relationship with Chaz did not last long. Soon, they decided to break up. Chaz moved away, leaving Heather alone in Murfreesboro. In early August, Heather had been excited to call her mother to share the great news. Heather had been accepted to college, and her mother had been so proud. On a normal morning at her real estate brokerage firm in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, on August 7, 2015, Kelsey Price had arrived at work and begun her daily routine. However, she had noticed that her friend and co-worker, Heather, had been running late as usual. Kelsey had decided to call Heather to wake her up but had received no response. Remembering Heather's plans for the night before, Kelsey hadn't been worried because Heather had asked her to pick her up if she overslept or didn't answer the phone. So, Kelsey had decided to go to Heather's apartment to wake her up. Heather's apartment had been in the same complex where they had worked. When she arrived, Kelsey had found the front door unlocked and had gone inside. She had found Heather lying on her bed, sleeping on her stomach, wearing only a crop top and no underwear. At first, Kelsey had thought Heather had had a wild night, but when she had tried to wake her up and had gotten no response, she had begun to worry. Kelsey had tapped Heather's leg, but there had still been no response. When she had touched Heather's leg, Kelsey had noticed that her leg had been very cold and had felt terrified. Kelsey Price had left the apartment and immediately called 911. Emergency services had quickly arrived on the scene. Detective Tommy Massey had been one of the first to arrive at the crime scene. He and the forensic team had conducted a thorough search of the apartment. There, they had discovered that Heather had been brutally beaten, showing signs of torture and sexual assault. Heather's hair had been covered in blood and splattered against the walls. Detective Massey and his partner, Detective Maples, had recalled the case as a terrifying nightmare. Witnessing this heartbreaking scene had been difficult, especially since they had shared the same last name as the victim, Heather Maples. Detectives had quickly realized that the case could be related to Heather's personal life. At that time, most of her friends had been suspected because they had all been close to Heather. In particular, her apartment had shown no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the attacker might have been invited in by Heather. While examining the scene, detectives had discovered several important pieces of evidence. Among them, an unidentified DNA sample and a hair that hadn't belonged to Heather had both been sent for analysis. In addition, a bloody fingerprint on the right side of Heather's bed had been a very important clue. According to Detective Massey, if someone had intentionally created a fingerprint, the trace wouldn't have been so clear. This fingerprint had also been sent for analysis in order to find the perpetrator. Heather's cell phone had been found in her apartment, but without a password, the police couldn't access the phone. At this time, Kelsey had played an important role in helping the police with the phone and also in notifying Heather's mother of her death. Detective Massey had hoped to get more information about Heather from her friend Kelsey Price. Kelsey had said that the relationship between Heather and Chaz had been quite tense because Chaz had had anger management problems and had been sometimes too aggressive with Heather. Therefore, Heather had decided to end this relationship. Having received important information, the police had decided to investigate Chaz immediately. However, an unexpected development had occurred when a young man named Michael had appeared at the crime scene. He had had the key to Heather's apartment and said he had met Heather at a bar. Michael had said that he hadn't had sex with Heather. Michael had testimony that the evening before Heather had died, she had called him and invited him to dinner. After dinner, Michael had gone home, and Heather had gone to a local bar with friends. Heather had called Michael at 11:40 to ask for help because she had been having trouble at a bar. A man named Otavio had been bothering her and making her uncomfortable. Michael had agreed to go to the bar to help and then had driven Heather home. When they had arrived at the house, Heather had called Michael and asked him to buy some things, including biscuits, gravy, eggs, and sausage. After buying those things, Michael had driven Heather home and seen her go up the stairs. That had been the last time he had seen Heather, at approximately 2:30 a.m. on August 7th. During questioning, Michael had explained that he had had Heather's key and often unlocked the front door for her. He had also said that Heather's front door had often been left unlocked because she hadn't had a pocket for her keys. Investigators had taken Michael's fingerprints and DNA, but the results of the analysis had shown that they hadn't matched the fingerprints and DNA found at the crime scene. After Michael had been cleared as a suspect, investigators had turned their attention to the man who had been with Heather that night, Otavio. Kelsey's help in unlocking Heather's cell phone had raised the police's suspicions of Otavio. Detectives had discovered that Heather had texted Otavio, a friend of hers, inviting him to her apartment just hours before she was found dead. When asked about Otavio, a friend of Heather's had said, "I didn't know much about him. He seemed like a really nice guy. He was funny." When asked why Heather had sent this friend a photo of herself and Otavio, the friend had been unclear. However, when questioned further, the friend had explained that Otavio had been more aggressive than usual at the bar, and Heather had been taken by surprise. She had not been prepared for this. Detectives had decided to speak to Otavio to get his side of the story. Otavio had said he had been hanging out with Heather. Otavio and Heather had had some tequila and then had gone to the gym for a while. When asked about the photo of Otavio and Heather, Otavio had said it had been taken before they left for the gym. The photo had been taken by Heather and posted on Snapchat. The detectives had immediately realized that Otavio had known nothing about Heather's death. But what if he had been involved in the case? Meanwhile, the interrogation had continued. The police had said that Heather had texted him and asked him to come to her house. However, Otavio had denied it. When asked about Heather's late-night text, Otavio had said that she had texted him around 2:30 but that he had fallen asleep and only saw the text the next morning. The detectives had escalated their questioning of Otavio with a harsh interrogation method. They had told him that people had seen him at Heather's apartment, that there had been surveillance footage of him, and that there had been pictures of him with Heather. They had said that Otavio had gone to Heather's apartment after she had texted him to come back, and then something had happened. They had also told him that there had been strange DNA all over Heather and that it would be compared to his DNA. Otavio had been shocked by what he had heard. He had seemed genuinely clueless about what had happened to Heather. After questioning, he had agreed to a DNA test, believing that it would clear his name. The results had proved him right, as the DNA found at the crime scene did not match his, so the police had eliminated Otavio as a suspect. Detectives had continued to investigate, reviewing surveillance footage and carefully examining every detail provided by witnesses, but had still had no leads on the case. On the 9th day of the investigation, Detective Massey had been about to leave the office late at night when he had received an important call from a forensic lab director. The call had brought the answer Massey had been waiting for regarding the bloody fingerprints found on Heather's bed. The prints had been matched to a young man named Brandon Bowling, who had a fingerprint record from a previous job at a company. While questioning Brandon, Detective Massey had asked Brandon how he had known Heather. Brandon had replied that they had met at the gym. Massey had continued by asking Brandon when exactly he had met Heather. It had been clear that Detective Massey had been taking a light-hearted approach to the interview, wanting to give Brandon a chance to explain what had happened that night. After hours of questioning Brandon, he admitted that he had last been to Heather's apartment in July and had never seen her again. However, the police produced evidence of his fingerprints on Heather's bed, which matched his own. Since the fingerprints collected from Heather's house were fresh, the detectives believed that Brandon was lying. Apparently, Brandon had some secrets and was hiding them, which raised suspicions about him. Brandon seemed to realize that all the evidence was against him and that he could be arrested, but he continued to deny any involvement in Heather's death. After questioning, the investigators asked Brandon to provide a DNA sample, claiming that if he was innocent, the test results would prove it. Brandon agreed and hoped to be released from police custody, but that did not happen. Investigators asked the court for permission to access Brandon's phone to track his movements, calls, and texts on the night of the murder. When the court granted permission, they discovered a video on Brandon's phone that shocked even the most experienced detectives. In the video, Heather's room was recorded, capturing everything from intimate behavior to beatings. Heather was still alive at the time of the recording. As a result, Brandon Richmond Bowling was arrested. In February 2018, Brandon pleaded guilty to assaulting Heather Maples. Consequently, He was sentenced to 40 years in prison without the possibility of parole. During the trial, Heather's mother, Jennifer, made a strong impression with her emotional speech. She announced that she forgave Brandon Bowling for the crimes he had committed against her family. After the trial ended, Jennifer met Brandon Bowling's mother in the hallway. There, she expressed her sympathy and shared the woman's pain with a warm hug. She said that they both lost a loved one that day. Unfortunately, however, Brandon Bowling never revealed the real reason behind his actions, leaving many questions and thoughts about his motives. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Valentina Tres Palacios. Valentina Tres Palacios was born on December 16, 2001, in Bogota, Colombia. She is currently studying international business and commerce, but her true passion is music. Since childhood, she has loved music and pursued this passion by studying and becoming a professional DJ. After receiving her DJ certificate, Valentina started her career in Colombia and quickly made a name for herself due to her talent and exceptional musicality. Throughout her career, she has made many friends from different countries. Valentina has had the opportunity to travel to many countries to perform and showcase her talent. She has performed with famous musicians and has toured more than 20 cities in her country. She has also participated in important international events, including festivals in Colombia, Chile, Mexico, Brazil, and Peru. With her talent and musicality, Valentina has been recognized as having a bright future ahead. She is loved and sought after across the country and regularly performs at top nightclubs. Valentina is a cheerful young woman who is always smiling and loves to party. She also maintains social media accounts where she shares her performances and updates her followers on her daily life. Valentina shares two important aspects of her life on social media: her growing popularity in the music industry and her romantic relationship with John Kopeck, an American she met online in late 2021. As their relationship progressed, their communication improved significantly. Initially, Valentina was not looking for a serious relationship, but she eventually became attracted to John, and their relationship turned into a romance. John Kopeck, a resident of the United States, showed a deep interest in Valentina's life. Valentina invested a lot in their relationship, and John supported her financially to help achieve her dreams. Valentina took a cosmetic course, which included hyaluronic acid injections into her lips, and later, enhancements to her cheekbones. John also recommended surgery in silicone breast implants, which significantly changed her appearance within a few months. These changes made Valentina the talk of the town. John sent her money regularly and eventually decided to marry her. John Kopeck initially planned to move to Colombia to live with Valentina. However, Valentina became suspicious of the relationship because she knew that John was extremely jealous and had hired a private investigator to monitor her every contact and activity. By January 2023, John had committed to marrying Valentina and began arranging the necessary paperwork. He had also rented an apartment in the northern part of Bogota, where he planned to spend weekends with Valentina until they found a permanent place to live. However, on January 22, 2023, a garbage collector discovered a blue suitcase in a dumpster near a park in Colombia. The suitcase was taped shut and surrounded by several trash bags. When the worker opened the suitcase, they discovered the body of a woman whose head was clearly visible inside. The worker was so frightened by the discovery that he drove several blocks away before calling the police. The Capitol Police Department quickly dispatched a team to investigate the incident. The officers who arrived at the scene witnessed a horrific sight. The victim's body was found in a suitcase. After several hours of investigation, the police identified the victim as Valentina Tres Palacios. An initial examination of the body showed no signs of violence, no weapons or knives were found, and there was no dismemberment. However, after opening the suitcase, detectives discovered that the victim was wearing pajamas with a belt. This suggested that the victim may have been attacked while she was sleeping. Additionally, police found a black cardboard box inside the suitcase containing items that could help identify the body, including a student ID card, a password that the victim often used, and several other documents and personal belongings. Investigators discovered something strange among the items they collected. These types of documents are not often found in similar cases. After finding the suitcase containing the body, the police contacted Valentina's family and learned that she had attended a party with friends on Saturday, January 21st. Forensic examination results showed that she had been hit multiple times in the head. Her body was found with severe injuries, including heavy bleeding on the right side of her tongue and 5 cuts around her neck, indicating that she had been strangled. After Valentina's murder, the police began questioning her friends and relatives. They started asking questions about Valentina's relationships. As a famous DJ with a hot body, she was a very popular and well-connected person. Among those questioned, a friend of Valentina's expressed concern and suspected Valentina's boyfriend, John Kopeck, of being involved in the case because of his excessively jealous behavior. At this point, suspicions turned to Valentina's boyfriend, John, and a closer investigation into him was launched. The police initially relied on surveillance cameras around John's home, examining his actions on the days of the crime. John Kopeck arrived in Bogotá at approximately 8:53 p.m. on January 19th. Surveillance cameras recorded him entering the apartment with a blue suitcase identical to the one used to contain Valentina's body. This information made John the first suspect to come to the attention of the police, as he was also the last person to see Valentina alive. When detectives attempted to contact John, the call was routed to voicemail. Valentina's family had appreciated John's calm and kind personality, and they did not think he was involved in this terrible crime, especially since John and Valentina had a wedding planned. Suspicions about John grew when investigators visited his rental apartment. There, they discovered that John had left and was nowhere to be found on Monday, January 23rd. It is worth noting that John Kopeck deleted his social media pages early in the morning after Valentina's death, making him the only suspect at the time. Investigators analyzed surveillance camera footage in the building from Friday evening to early Sunday morning. This helped them clarify the events that took place. The Colombian police and the prosecutor's office also reviewed several hours of video footage from cameras in the area where Valentina and John were. Camera footage and WhatsApp conversations played a key role in uncovering Valentina's final hours. Valentina and John were scheduled to meet on January 20th. John arrived on the 19th, cleaned the apartment they would share, and then texted Valentina. Valentina and John began arguing that night because Valentina was partying while he was away. John questioned whether Valentina was with any men. Valentina refused to answer, believing he was jealous and suspicious. John eventually reminded Valentina to meet on the 20th. Before the meeting, Valentina planned to visit some beauty salons for eyelash and hair extensions to feel more confident. However, on the 20th, Valentina and John disagreed about the date and only clarified their plans when surveillance cameras recorded activities at Valentina's apartment that evening. According to the surveillance cameras, on the 20th, John helped Valentina pack her luggage at 6 p.m. when the two moved into their new home. Valentina also made a video call to her mother and said she would return after the trip. The video also showed Valentina with John Kopeck, who had rented a car to transport Valentina's belongings. Valentina and John were caught on surveillance footage entering her new apartment at 7 p.m. Valentina and John were caught on camera engaging in some activities before heading home. It was Saturday, January 21st, at 1 a.m. They took a taxi to a nightclub in southeast New York where Valentina was performing. When they arrived at the nightclub around 4 a.m., Valentina immediately started working. John Poulos stayed with her while she got ready. At around 5 a.m., Valentina's performance ended, and they then went into the club's office to meet the owner, his wife, and a companion. Valentina and John left the club around 6 a.m. That was the last time Valentina's friends saw her. She walked out of the club smiling and seemingly fine. Valentina reached out to a friend by phone on Saturday and said she had no plans to go anywhere. She planned to stay home with John and perhaps go out to dinner or cook together. Valentina's last conversation with her friend was via video at 9 p.m. Valentina's mother, Laura Hidalgo, said her 13-year-old son was the last person to talk to Valentina via video. Valentina was lying in bed with John, and they appeared happy. The family has no further information about their situation. On January 21st, at 10:43 p.m., surveillance cameras in the building recorded Valentina and John. Valentina was looking out of the apartment door while John stood in front of it, looking pensive, pacing back and forth, and occasionally grimacing. John was again caught on camera on Sunday, January 22nd, at 9 a.m. This time, he left the room with 2 bags of trash, and Valentina was not seen. John then drove to the parking lot, picked up a silver car, and put the bags in the back seat. Next, he returned to the apartment, took 2 suitcases from the trunk, and brought them back to the apartment. At the apartment, a gray blanket was placed on top of the suitcase that John had taken out. It was 10 a.m. He put this suitcase on the cart for transport. A second bag was placed next to it, and in this bag was Valentina's head wrapped in a blanket. Before leaving, John observed the parking lot after parking and noticed that there was no one nearby. He also checked the area around the elevator to make sure no one was getting off. Then he quickly returned to the car and tried to lift the heavy suitcase into the trunk. Finally, he took the bag and put it in the car, then drove away. The surveillance camera recorded the car circulating at various points in the city. Around noon, John appeared to be looking for a safe place to dump the suitcase. The car then pulled into a parking lot and parked near a dumpster. At 3 p.m., John got out of the car, looked around to see if anyone was following him, then took out the suitcase, which appeared to be very heavy, and threw it into the dumpster. He then returned to the car, took out a bag, and placed it in the dumpster before closing the lid and exiting the parking lot. The car then traveled west until it reached El Dorado International Airport, where John was last seen at 4:30 p.m. The Department of Homeland Security announced a $1 million reward on Monday, January 23rd, for information leading to the arrest of John Tres Palacios. Colombian authorities sought Interpol's assistance in issuing an arrest warrant for John as he fled the country's borders. On January 24th, Panamanian National Police arrested John at El Dorado International Airport, just as he was preparing to leave for Turkey. Colombian authorities quickly began the process of deporting John from the country after Valentina's death. More than 14 criminal investigators were involved in the investigation, gathering evidence to clarify the truth. The result of this investigation included the analysis of more than 300 hours of video footage from security cameras, conducted in cooperation with the public prosecutor's office. An important discovery in the case was the finding of Valentina's cell phone near El Dorado International Airport. A security guard happened to see the phone on the grass while walking near a gas station and picked it up. After realizing that the phone did not have a SIM card, he took it home with the intention of selling it, not knowing it belonged to Valentina. However, the security guard's wife called him after realizing that the photo of the girl on the phone's wallpaper matched the photos seen on social media, as well as the photo of the young woman found dead in the trash. Unfortunately, the phone was put up for sale and repackaged because someone wanted to buy it. After leaving the nightclub, John and Valentina's driver gave his statement. The driver had been assigned to take Valentina and John to a nightclub in the south of the city. When John stopped for a moment, Valentina got into the car and shouted that she had written something. When the driver looked at her, Valentina seemed uncertain, and the driver checked his phone. The driver discovered that Valentina had warned him that she was in danger in a Spanish text message to customer service. John then asked Valentina if she was okay. While the car was being driven, John and Valentina conversed in English. The driver asked them if they were bilingual, and they answered yes. When they left around 4 a.m. that same day, the driver went to the nightclub with the couple. He then knew nothing about the incident until he was informed of Valentina's death a few days later. In the WhatsApp version open on Valentina's computer, a friend of Valentina's in Caragana provided the prosecutor's office in Bogota with conversations on Valentina's computer, which offered clues about what happened. One of the key pieces of evidence found in the investigation of Valentina's case was a discovery by one of her friends, who found the suitcase containing her body. This suitcase was believed to have been in the same location as Valentina's. The friend also said that on the day Valentina was in Bogota, she received messages from John Poulos and several selfies of him with the luggage. The suitcase John was carrying was very similar to the one investigators found in the case, though the color was indistinguishable. While it is unclear why Valentina left the WhatsApp session open on her friend's computer, the messages helped investigators understand what happened at night when Valentina was killed. Forensic investigators determined that she died of asphyxiation due to being strangled with a rope. There were also signs of violence on her body. The autopsy revealed that Valentina died in her sleep. Criminologists came to this conclusion because she was wearing pajamas. All the evidence pointed to John Poulos being present at the scene. However, in the indictment, John did not admit responsibility for Valentina's death. He argued that his arrest in Panama was illegal because he did not have a lawyer to assist him. John was not proficient enough in Spanish, and a translator was not present during the 5-hour hearing. John was charged with involvement in Valentina's death and deleted his social media accounts. John Poulos was born on May 19, 1987, in Wisconsin, USA. He is married and has 3 children. However, he also has a criminal record related to violence against women, including a restraining order from his ex-wife. One of the women who had a relationship with John Poulos revealed that he frequently visited pornographic websites, spending up to 5 to 6 hours a day on them. She also commented that John often exhibited strange behavior, such as fantasizing in telling ghost stories. Another model who interacted with John Poulos on social media said that she knew him as being from Texas, USA. She stopped contacting him after he made a strange comment, including the words jealous and death. Specifically, John asked her, "If I was at a bar, would you be willing to talk to me?" When the woman refused, John replied, "There's a chance one of us will die of jealousy." The woman also said that although John donated money to her, she never chatted with him via video because his communication style was often erratic. It's important to note that John also displayed some suspicious behavior towards Valentina. He contacted Valentina on social media and began sending her money persistently and consistently. In this case, treating women like property was a red flag that the women overlooked, and they initially trusted him. John thought he could buy their trust with money from the start. Authorities investigating the case believe that John Poulos thought that the waste disposal system in Colombia was similar to that in the United States, where he lived. In his mind, the waste would settle in a container and eventually be disposed of. However, Poulos overlooked the fact that recyclers and people living on the streets regularly rummage through trash looking for items they can sell or use. John Poulos is currently being held in a separate cell in Bogota. The next step is to prove that all the evidence links him to the crime and to find the real motive behind this horrific murder in Colombia. The criminal code stipulates a prison sentence of up to 50 years for the crime John was charged with. John Poulos was subsequently sentenced to 42 years and 8 months in prison, was banned from approaching or attempting to contact the Tres Palacios family for 20 years, and was ordered to be deported from Colombia after serving his sentence. John's defense team said they would appeal the verdict. They argued that John was innocent of Valentina's murder. Valentina's situation is similar to many others. She thought she had found true love, but it turned out to be a mistake. Does anyone feel safe connecting with strangers on social media?